10, 9, ignition sequence.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
1, 0, and liftoff.
Mission complete, Houston. After serving the world for over 30 years, the space shuttle's earned its place in history and it's come to a final stop.
Welche Hintergründe haben Sie über diesen Zwischenfall?
Ja, das ist ein Zwischenfall, der hat sich abgespielt 200 Kilometer nordwestlich von Los Angeles in einer sehr ländlichen Gegend, Kern County. Es ist die Taft Union High School und das Sheriff's Office dort, das Sheriffsbüro, hat bestätigt, dass 2 Menschen verletzt sind. Der eine sei mit einem Hubschrauber in ein Krankenhaus gebracht worden, der andere hat jede medizinische Hilfe verweigert. Es gibt aber auch von lokalen Sendern Berichte, wonach diese beiden Opfer tot sein sollen. Da gibt es noch sehr widersprüchliche Angaben. Klar ist auf jeden Fall, das bestätigt auch das Sheriff's Office, dass der Täter im Gewahrsam der Polizei ist. Auch da bleibt offen, ob er angeschossen oder ob auch er möglicherweise gar tot ist. Auch das ist nach wie vor unklar. Es findet ja nach wie vor ironischerweise genau an dem Tag statt, an dem der Vizepräsident Joe Biden, der Sonderbeauftragte von Präsident Obama, mit der mächtigen Waffenlobby Gespräche über eine Verschärfung des Waffenrechts führt.
Danke für den Moment, Carsten Mierke. Was wir noch wissen, lokale Medien berichten, der Täter soll auch ein Schüler sein, der mutmaßliche Täter. Sobald es mehr gibt, erfahren Sie es bei uns, liebe Zuschauer. Danke für den Moment, Carsten Mierke.
Schon wieder fallen in einer amerikanischen Schule Schüsse. Die Taft High School etwa 190 Kilometer von Los Angeles entfernt. Ein 16-Jähriger wurde schwer verletzt. Besorgte Eltern holten ihre Kinder ab. Der Täter konnte gefasst werden. Es ist wirklich beängstigend, zu wissen, dass irgendeiner in die Schule kommen kann und dein Kind töten könnte. Amerika diskutiert über schärfere Waffengesetze, die Nerven liegen blank. Wenn du uns unsere Waffen wegnehmen willst, poltert dieser Waffenfanatiker und Lobbyist in einer Talkshow ganze 15 Minuten lang, dann wird der Unabhängigkeitskrieg von 1776 noch einmal geschehen.
1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearms.
Auch Waffengegner lässt das Thema nicht kalt. Keiner braucht ein Sturmgewehr oder mehr als 10 Schuss, um ein Reh zu töten. Zu viele Unschuldige sind schon ums Leben gekommen. Präsident Obama ist für eine Verschärfung des Waffenrechts, notfalls per Dekret. Sein Vize traf sich nun auch mit der mächtigen Waffenlobby. Wenn wir nur ein Leben retten könnten, dann sollten wir das tun. Doch es gab keine Annäherung. Im Gegenteil, die NRA bleibt uneinsichtig. Wir glauben nicht, dass ein Verbot von halbautomatischen Sturmgewehren, das wir schon mal hatten, irgendetwas bringt. Radikale Waffenfreunde wehren sich bereits gegen jegliche Einschränkungen. Wie hier in Denver pochen sie unvermindert auf das von der Verfassung garantierte Recht auf Waffen.
Es sind 8 Konzerte. Jedes war sofort ausverkauft. Die Mensch-Maschinen von Kraftwerk. Heute Abend das erste Konzert in Düsseldorf, da wo sie herkommen, die Kraftwerker. Das Model, das gut aussieht, die Autobahn, auf der wir fahren. Alles längst Legende in der halben Welt. Die New York Times hat sie mal die Beatles der elektronischen Tanzmusik genannt. Kraftwerk erklärtermaßen Vorbild für Depeche Mode, Rammstein, David Bowie, wie sie alle heißen. Jetzt also 8 Tage lang jeweils ein Konzert in der Kunstsammlung NRW. Kraftwerk spielt immer ein Album. Konzerte, bei denen garantiert keiner tanzt und die trotzdem rocken. Der Film dazu morgen bei uns.
Der Auftakt zur Konzertreihe im Düsseldorfer Museum Kunstpalast. Bei Kraftwerk ist alles anders. Kein Gedränge vor dem Einlass wie bei anderen Konzerten. Die Fans sind mit der Gruppe eben älter geworden. Die Tickets zu allen Shows waren innerhalb von Minuten ausverkauft. Kein Wunder, schließlich passen nicht mal 900 Zuschauer pro Abend in den Kunstpalast.
Wir sind sehr große Kraftwerk-Fans seit 30 Jahren und wir sind sehr gespannt, very excited about tonight.
Das ist mein erstes Kraftwerkskonzert, obwohl ich ein Kraftwerk-Fan der ersten Stunde bin, aber das hat sich nie ergeben und somit heute ist das Premiere für mich.
Autobahn ist von 1975. Das Stück ist bald 40 Jahre alt und man könnte meinen, es ist was ganz Aktuelles.
Das ist der Song, mit dem alles angefangen hat.
Wir fahren, fahren, fahren auf der Autobahn. Wir fahren, fahren, fahren auf der Autobahn.
Autobahn, ein weltweiter Hit, mit dem Kraftwerk Mitte der 70er Jahre mal eben den Elektropop erfunden haben.
Ein weites Tal, die Sonne scheint mit Glitzerstrahl.
Aber es gab auch eine Zeit vor der Autobahn. Florian Schneider und Ralf Hütter gründeten Kraftwerk 1970. Damals hörte sich die Band noch so an. Mit Autobahn dann die Wende, weg vom Krautrock hin zur kühlen Ästhetik der elektronischen Popmusik. Der Sound, für den Kraftwerk auch heute noch bekannt sind.
Wir fahren, fahren, fahren auf der Autobahn. Wir fahren, fahren, fahren auf der Autobahn.
Ein Konzert wie ein Kinofilm. Pünktlich nach 2 Stunden haben Kraftwerk dann den Stecker gezogen.
Super geil, muss ich sagen. Also mir hat das echt extrem gut gefallen.
Also es war echt gänsehautmäßig, also ich bin echt bewegt.
9 weitere Shows im Kunstpalast spielen Kraftwerk noch bis zum 20. Januar. Reif fürs Museum sind sie aber noch lange nicht.
Klaus Wowereit gab sich bei der Abstimmung zum Misstrauensvotum ziemlich entspannt. War er doch sicher, dass die Koalition hinter ihm steht.
Ich hatte nie einen Zweifel daran gehabt, dass diese Koalition steht, dass sie Vertrauen hat zur Regierung, sonst kann man auch nicht arbeiten. Die Opposition hat versucht, hier Kapital zu schlagen, aus der Flughafenkrise eine Regierungskrise daraus zu inszenieren. Das ist deutlich zurückgewiesen worden.
Für die Opposition bleibt der Regierende trotz ihres gescheiterten Misstrauensvotums angeschlagen.
Wir bezweifeln weiterhin, dass Klaus Wowereit derjenige ist, der die Geschicke dieser Stadt zum Guten wenden kann.
Ich bin mir ganz sicher, dass das an den Problemen ja nichts ändert und deswegen auch diese Regierung die Legislaturperiode nicht zu Ende bringen wird.
Wir können davon ausgehen, dass jedes einzelne Projekt, das diese Koalition jetzt angeht, überschattet wird von dem BER-Skandal.
Wowereits Amtskollege Matthias Platzek, der sich als neuer Aufsichtsratschef der Flughafengesellschaft zur Wahl stellt, ließ heute Gerüchte dementieren, dieses Amt nur für eine Übergangszeit zu übernehmen. Neben Brandenburg und Berlin ist auch der Bund am Flughafen beteiligt und deshalb mahnt der Bundesverkehrsminister, dass das Gesamtpaket aus Aufsichtsrat und Geschäftsführung stimmen müsse.
Der Aufsichtsrat muss umgestaltet werden und wenn auch Herr Platzek den Vorsitz übernimmt, mit ausgewiesenen Experten ergänzt werden. Es muss die Geschäftsführung, wie gesagt, optimiert werden.
Die Personaldiskussionen können nicht darüber hinwegtäuschen, dass viele Probleme auf der Flughafenbaustelle immer noch ungelöst sind.
There's a big storm system also heading into the northwest of Europe. Still a lot of snow across central areas, a huge amount of cloud, bitterly cold. These are the current temperatures. Minus 15 in Oslo, 2 Celsius in London, minus 3 in Munich. That cold air filtering all the way down into central areas as well, across into the south, you can see. And with the wind chill, in every single case, it is feeling even colder than that. So we've got one low system coming into the west. That's turning over to snow as it hits that cold air that's already in place. And then you can see the UK, there's a system across the south. There's another one coming into the northwest. This is the one bringing the snow. It could be very widespread. There are all sorts of warnings in place, but really it's about that freezing cold air too. So some very dangerous and icy conditions out there, John, as well for the next few days.
Jenny Harrison, thanks very much.
Heute gab es dazu aber zumindest richtig viel Sonne. Emmerich heute, Brücke, Sonnenaufgang verbreitet, war es ein richtig schöner Tag. Und es gab noch etwas mehr Sonnenschein als gestern. So sah das Ganze von oben aus. Sie sehen, hier kamen in den Norden und Nordwesten ein paar dichtere Wolken. Auch in der Eifel hielten sich etwas kompaktere Wolkenfelder da, auch noch ein paar Flocken. Ansonsten aber viel Sonne in ganz Nordrhein-Westfalen. Und das ist die Sonnenscheindauer von heute. Soest 7 Stunden 32 Minuten, Issum 7,26. In Düsseldorf 7 Stunden und 19 Minuten. Und wenn wir jetzt mal daneben stellen, wie viel Sonne es in diesem Jahr bisher insgesamt gab, dann sieht man, das meiste davon wurde wirklich fast heute erreicht. In Soest sind es insgesamt jetzt 10 Stunden 54 Minuten und in Issum 17 Stunden 41 Minuten. Also davon allein heute 7 Stunden und 26 Minuten Sonne. Und auch der morgige Tag wird recht freundlich. Das reicht so bis Montag. Wir liegen eigentlich mehr oder weniger unter Hochdruck. Einfluss, was aber im Winter nicht unbedingt heißt strahlender Sonnenschein und tolles Wetter. Es kommt weiterhin aus Osten sehr kalte Luft zu uns und eben es streifen uns auch ab und zu Fronten, die dann in den nächsten Tagen mal für so ein paar Schneeflocken sorgen. Das wird vor allem am Dienstag der Fall sein. Weiter geht es jetzt aber erst einmal mit etwas dichteren Wolken im Norden und auch im Südwesten hängen die Wolken etwas kompakter. In der Eifel reicht es weiterhin für ein paar Schneeflocken, aber das ist jetzt nicht wirklich, dass es überall weiß werden würde. Über der Mitte Nordrhein-Westfalens oft sogar sternklarer Himmel und deshalb wird es da auch ziemlich kalt. Die Temperaturen gehen bis morgen früh zurück auf -5 bis -12 Grad in Siegen. Morgen Vormittag sonnige Abschnitte, ein paar dichtere Wolken im Südwesten, vor allem weiterhin in der Eifel. Und auch über den Norden ziehen etwas dichtere Wolken, so Münsterland rüber bis zum Niederrhein. Im Laufe des Nachmittags ein ähnliches Bild, zwischendrin immer mal wieder Sonne und dann etwas kompaktere Wolken in Ostwestfalen. Da kommt eben ein etwas dichteres Wolkenpaket an und vielleicht auch mal die ein oder andere Flocke, aber auch da kann man nicht wirklich so von Schneefall sprechen. Temperaturen steigen bis zum Nachmittag auf Werte zwischen -3 und 0 Grad. Der Wind dazu überwiegend schwach. Er kommt meist aus östlichen bis nordöstlichen Richtungen. Und so sehen die nächsten Tage aus. Am Montag, so rum, nicht Donnerstag, die Woche fängt erst an. Montag etwas dichtere Wolken im Nordwesten und auch so Richtung Siegerland und Sauerland. Sonst recht viel Sonnenschein bei Höchstwerten zwischen -4 und -2 Grad. Davor auch wieder eine sehr kalte Nacht mit Temperaturen um -10 Grad. Und am Dienstag streift uns dann im Westen eine Front. Die sorgt immer mal wieder für etwas Schneefall. Temperaturen dann -3 bis 0 Grad. Da dann wieder kaum Chance auf Sonne. Und es bleibt auch erst einmal kalt. Hier die 0-Grad-Linie. Sie sehen, das geht am Ende der kommenden Woche langsam wieder bergauf in den leichten Plusbereich. Bis dahin aber winterliches Wetter. Dafür in den nächsten 2 Tagen aber auch mal Sonne.
Genau ein Jahr nach der Costa Concordia-Katastrophe mit 32 Toten sind Angehörige von Opfern aus aller Welt auf die italienische Insel Giglio gereist, um an den Gedenkfeierlichkeiten teilzunehmen. Viele wurden von ihren Gefühlen übermannt. Die Bergung des Wracks wird noch einige Monate dauern. Aus Giglio berichtet unsere Reporterin Dorte Störmann.
Am Morgen fährt ein Boot mit Angehörigen der 32 Todesopfer aufs Meer hinaus. Hier, unmittelbar vor Giglio, rammte die Concordia vor genau einem Jahr einen Unterwasserfelsen. Ein Teil davon blieb im Rumpf stecken. Jetzt wird er zurück im Meer versenkt. Die tiefe Wunde, die das Unglück riss, soll so wenigstens symbolisch geschlossen werden. Es ist sehr hart, jetzt alles wieder zu sehen. Es ist fast nicht zu ertragen. Aber das Leben muss weitergehen. Am Mittag Gottesdienst in der Kirche von Giglio. Hier hatte der Pfarrer direkt nach dem Unglück Überlebenden Zuflucht gewährt. Und immer noch werden wir jeden Tag an das Unglück erinnert, solange das Schiff hier im Hafen liegt. Deswegen arbeiten schon seit Monaten fast 400 Mann an Bord des Wracks. Rund um die Uhr, 7 Tage die Woche. Doch immer wieder müssen die Bergungsarbeiten wegen schlechten Wetters unterbrochen werden. Rund 30 Tage sind dadurch bereits verloren gegangen. Und auch bis zum Frühling erwarten die Bergungsexperten weitere schwere Stürme. Es ist die größte Bergung aller Zeiten, erklärt uns Nicholas Sloan, der Bergungsmeister. Denn das gigantische Schiff soll im Ganzen gehoben werden. In einer ersten Phase wurde das Wrack bereits stabilisiert. Unter Wasser installieren Spezialisten jetzt 6 Plattformen, die als Bett für das aufgerichtete Schiff dienen sollen. Dafür müssen wir extrem präzise Bohrungen vornehmen. Die Plattformen unterm Schiff sind so groß wie Fußballfelder. Und wir dürfen uns höchstens um 1 Grad verbohren, sonst passt nichts mehr. Anschließend werden 15 Stahltanks angebracht und an diesen Seile, die das Schiff hochziehen sollen. Dann werden auch auf der anderen Seite noch einmal 15 Tanks befestigt, in sie wird Luft gepumpt, Auftrieb entsteht und die Concordia ist wieder schwimmfähig. 305 Millionen Euro wird das gesamte Projekt mindestens kosten. Ende September wird sie weg sein. Erst dann wird so etwas wie Normalität zurückkehren nach Giglio. Vergessen wird man hier wohl nie. Die Namen der 32 Opfer stehen seit heute auf einer Gedenktafel, auch 12 Deutsche sind darunter. Am Abend um 21:45 Uhr werden Glocken läuten, Schiffssirenen ertönen. Dann ist es genau ein Jahr her, dass die Costa Concordia mit fast 4.300 Menschen an Bord kenterte.
Es ist die Erinnerung an eine Schreckensnacht, die die ehemaligen Passagiere der Costa Concordia aus aller Welt wieder nach Giglio brachte. Auf der toskanischen Insel gedachten sie der 32 Mitreisenden, die das Kentern des Kreuzfahrtschiffes vor einem Jahr nicht überlebt hatten. Der Kapitän aber weist bis heute alle Schuld von sich. Antje Pieper aus Giglio.
Ankunft der Angehörigen auf Giglio. Viele sind noch immer fassungslos angesichts der Tragödie. Am Unglücksort gedachten sie der Toten in einem bewegenden Gottesdienst. Eine der 2 noch immer Vermissten ist Elio Vicenzis Frau. Betet für alle Opfer, bittet er. In die Trauer mischt sich auch Wut. Fast 4000 Menschen hätten sterben können aus Leichtsinn und Dummheit. Heute erst merke ich, dass ich nichts überwunden habe. Es kommt alles wieder zurück, ist wie vor einem Jahr. Viel zu nah kommt die Concordia damals der Insel, rammt einen Felsen und gerät in extreme Schieflage. Erst mit erheblicher Verspätung wird das Schiff evakuiert. Kapitän Schettino selbst verlässt es frühzeitig. Die Schuld am Unglück gibt er in einem Interview auch heute wieder seiner Crew. Das Wrack liegt noch immer vor Giglio, erinnert jeden Tag an die Toten. Die Bergungsarbeiten verzögern sich. Heute Blumenkränze von den Angehörigen. Sie waren auch dabei, als der Felsen, den die Concordia rammte und der im Schiffsrumpf stecken blieb, mit einer Gedenktafel an seinem Ursprungsort versenkt wurde. Auch an der Hafeneinfahrt wird an die Opfer erinnert. Sie sollen nicht vergessen werden.
Als Scharen von Radfahrern bei guter Luft durch Chinas Hauptstadt fuhren, sind schon lange vorbei. Heute stehen in Peking 20 Millionen Einwohner mit 5 Millionen Autos im Dauerstau und schleudern Abgase in die Luft. Seit Ende der Woche hat der Smog dramatische Ausmaße angenommen. Peking geht sprichwörtlich die Puste aus. Johannes Hano berichtet aus China.
So schlimm war es noch nie. Seit Tagen ist der Osten Chinas in ein finsteres Grau gehüllt, das selbst die Mittagssonne kaum durchdringt. Die Belastung mit dem gefährlichen, lungengängigen Feinstaub lag in Peking zeitweise bei fast 1000 Mikrogramm pro Kubikmeter, bis zu 40 Mal höher als der empfohlene Grenzwert. Maximal 25 Mikrogramm hält die Weltgesundheitsorganisation für unbedenklich. Die Menschen gefangen im Dreck. Ich kann das Problem nicht lösen, also muss ich mich wohl daran gewöhnen. Wir trinken viel Wasser und essen Morcheln, um die Giftstoffe aus dem Körper zu bekommen. Und es gibt viele Orte in China, an denen die Luft noch schlechter ist, wie in Zhejiang. Einige Flughäfen und Autobahnen wurden gesperrt. Die Bürger wurden aufgerufen, wenn möglich, die Häuser nicht zu verlassen, auf Autofahren zu verzichten. Denn die Industrie- und Fahrzeugabgase und die aus den vielen Kohlekraftwerken können bei der derzeitigen Wetterlage nicht abziehen. Wenn man länger, also 5 bis 10 Jahre in Städten lebt, in denen es immer wieder zu solchen Belastungen kommt, dann steigt das Risiko für Lungenkrankheiten, ganz besonders für Lungenkrebs. Es sind die Kosten des wirtschaftlichen Erfolges, die man dieser Tage in China riecht und schmeckt.
Die Menschen leiden nun den 4. Tag in Folge unter Rekordsmog. Die Feinstaubbelastung liegt rund 40 Mal höher als der Grenzwert der Weltgesundheitsorganisation. Die Menschen gehen nur so wenig wie möglich vor die Tür. Hauptgrund für die Luftverschmutzung ist das Verfeuern von Kohle in Kraftwerken und Industriebetrieben. Frühestens Mittwoch soll Wind aufkommen und die Schadstoffglocke auflösen.
Temperaturen von annähernd 50 Grad sind für Mensch und Tier kaum noch erträglich. Wir haben unseren Reporter Niels Büngen nach Dubbo in New South Wales geschickt, wo es so heiß ist, dass der Teer schon zu schmelzen beginnt.
Eine Wand aus rotem Sand schiebt sich über den Horizont. Es sind die Ausläufer eines Tropensturms, die dieses Naturschauspiel hervorzaubern. Doch jenseits der spektakulären Bilder haben die Australier die sengende Hitze längst satt. Nur so lässt sie sich noch ertragen oder in gekühlten Räumen. Aber wehe, die Klimaanlage fällt aus. Dann galoppiert das Thermometer im Auto schnell auf Saunawerte und lässt auch den ambitioniertesten Reporter schlapp machen. An der frischen Luft gleich der nächste Schlamassel.
In der Sonne liegen die Temperaturen mittlerweile bei weit über 50 Grad. Es ist unerträglich heiß. Ja, und so heiß, dass ich mit meinen Flipflops auf der Straße kleben bleibe.
Zu heiß für alles, was Kraft kostet. Diese Rucksacktouristen aus Deutschland haben das Kulturprogramm aus ihrem Reiseplan gestrichen.
Das Extrem habe ich so noch nicht erlebt und kann man wie gesagt einmal so haben, aber man denkt schon ab und zu mal an Schnee zu Hause.
Den wünschten sich auch die vielen Feuerwehrleute. Allein in New South Wales sind 30 Buschbrände außer Kontrolle. Wo die Flammen gewütet haben, finden sie immer mehr verletzte Tiere. Dieser kleine Wombat hat sich im Feuer Nase und Pfoten verbrannt und das kleine Babykänguru hat in der Flammenhölle seine Mutter verloren. In einer mobilen Tierklinik werden all die Waisenkinder aufgepäppelt, damit sie irgendwann wieder gesund in den australischen Dschungel entlassen werden können.
Ein Gefühl, als ob die Luft kocht. Auf den Wetterkarten gibt es eine neue Farbe, violett für Temperaturen über 50 Grad. Australien ächzt unter einer gewaltigen Hitzeglocke. Zehntausende Feuerwehrleute kämpfen gegen hunderte Großbrände. Auch das Besucherzentrum eines Observatoriums nordwestlich von Sydney fiel nun einem Feuersturm zum Opfer. 14 Kilometer hoch die Qualmfontäne. 2 Hochdruckgebiete haben in Australien eine Hitzeströmung ausgelöst. Meteorologischer Zufall oder werden die Befürchtungen der Klimaforscher nun Gewissheit?
Australien brennt. Seit Tagen lodern hunderte Wald- und Buschbrände im ganzen Land. Starke Winde und steigende Temperaturen haben die Brandgefahr weiter verschärft. Am Wochenende kletterten die Temperaturen auf 48 Grad Celsius. Via Skype sprechen wir mit dem australischen Meteorologen John McBride. Er lebt in Melbourne. Heiße Sommer sind die Australier gewohnt, sagt er uns. Doch diese Hitzewelle ist etwas anderes.
Diese Hitzewelle ist keine, die nur lokale Hitzerekorde bricht. Das Besondere ist, dass diesmal ein großes Gebiet betroffen ist. Die Hitze bedeckt das ganze Land. Die warmen Luftmassen liegen wie eine Dunstglocke über Australien.
Ein Ende ist nicht in Sicht. Die Wettervorhersage zeigt, dass die Gluthitze Australien auch in den nächsten Tagen fest im Griff haben wird. Bereits die letzten Jahre waren immer wieder geprägt von neuen Hitzerekorden. Der Meteorologe ist besorgt.
In den letzten 5 oder 6 Jahren hatten wir immer wieder Hitzewellen. Das ist neu für uns. Natürlich sind wir ein trockenes Land mit Wüste und so. Aber noch nie zuvor hatten wir eine so lange Periode von Hitzewellen, die das ganze Land betroffen haben.
Ein Land, das ebenfalls einen neuen Hitzerekord erlebte, waren die USA. Das Jahr 2012 war mit Abstand das heißeste Jahr seit Beginn der Temperaturaufzeichnungen. Im letzten Jahr war es im Durchschnitt knapp 2 Grad wärmer. Bei Hitzerekorden wie diesen stellt sich schnell immer die gleiche Frage. Ist das bereits der Klimawandel? Diese Frage ist schwer zu beantworten, denn Wetter ist nicht gleich Klima. Martin Clausen vom Max-Planck-Institut für Meteorologie benutzt einen Würfel, um den Unterschied zu erklären.
Also Wetter ist das Einzelereignis und Klima ist dann die Statistik des Wetters. Zum Beispiel beim Würfel, wenn ich eine 1 würfel, ist das Einzelereignis, sozusagen das Wetter. Und wenn ich mir jetzt überlege, wie groß ist die Wahrscheinlichkeit, ein einzuwürfeln, muss ich eine Aussage über die Statistik machen. Und das ist dann die Klimatologie.
In diesem Würfelmodell ist die Wahrscheinlichkeit für jedes Wetter 1/6. Die Chancen sind gleich verteilt. Der Klimawandel würde einer Manipulation des Würfels entsprechen. Ändert sich das Klima, sind die Wetterereignisse nicht mehr gleich verteilt. Wetterextreme treten dann häufiger auf.
Allerdings sind diese Aussagen noch nicht sehr robust. Denn damit sie robust werden, damit wir sagen können, das ist so, die Statistik ist hat sich belastbar geändert, brauchen wir lange Messreihen. Und die fehlen, denn es ist ja so, ein Extremereignis tritt ja extrem selten auf. Und um die Statistik von Extremereignissen sauber analysieren zu können, brauchen wir lange Messreihen. Und die fehlen uns zurzeit.
Es lässt sich heute noch nicht beantworten, ob die Hitze in Australien bereits der Klimawandel ist. Auch der australische Meteorologe John McBride möchte nicht vom Einzelwetter auf den Klimawandel schließen. Dennoch lässt er sich zu einer Aussage hinreißen.
Ich persönlich glaube, dass wir jetzt anfangen, die Auswirkungen des Klimawandels zu spüren.
Sollte es so sein, müssen sich die Australier auf häufigere Hitzewellen einstellen. Denn einen Weg zurück gibt es nicht mehr.
Und schon im vergangenen Jahr gab es eine enorme Hitzewelle in den USA, 2010 in Russland. Laut einer heute vorgestellten Studie des Potsdamer Instituts für Klimafolgenforschung führt der Klimawandel weltweit zu dramatisch mehr Rekordhitzemonaten. Setzt sich die Erderwärmung weiter fort, soll es davon in 30 Jahren 12-mal mehr geben.
Liebe Zuschauer, guten Abend. Die kommende Woche bleibt winterlich, denn der Ableger der Kaltluft aus dem Nordosten, der wird Mitteleuropa erhalten bleiben. Das heißt, die Luft ist so kalt, dass es ausreicht, dass das, was aus den Wolken fällt, nicht als Regen, sondern als Schnee fällt. Dreht sich alles um Mitteleuropa und da bekommen auch wir morgen im Westen und auch die Alpen wieder etwas Schnee ab. Schauen wir noch kurz auf das Wetter im Süden Europas. Da dreht sich ein Tief, wovon auch die Alpen immer wieder etwas abbekommen. Und das bringt am Mittelmeer von der Iberischen Halbinsel fast bis rüber nach Griechenland immer wieder kräftige Schauer, teilweise Regen und teilweise auch Gewitter. Ja, und jetzt schauen wir nach Australien. Dort hat es ja diese schweren Waldbrände gegeben. Die Situation ist etwas entspannt, aber noch nicht ganz entspannt. Wir sehen hier unterschiedliche Dinge. Hier die Reste einer Kaltfront und hier noch einen Tropensturm. Und die Kaltfront, die ist seit gestern über Australien hinweggezogen und hat eben dort eine leichte Entspannung im Südosten gebracht. Und der Tropensturm ist weitgehend abgezogen. Und dann schauen wir jetzt noch mal auf die Temperatur. Das heißt also, die Entspannung bezieht sich hier hauptsächlich auf den Osten, Südosten. Sonst ist es noch weiterhin heiß. Richtige Entspannung wird es wahrscheinlich dann erst zum Ende der Woche geben. Das war's vom Wetter. Ihnen noch einen schönen Abend.
This is Mission Control Houston. Welcome to today's ISS update. It is Monday, January 14th, 2013. The 6-member crew of Expedition 34 is busy today on board the International Space Station with a variety of different maintenance tasks and also quite a bit of experiment work going on today. The entire crew started off their morning today with an emergency escape drill. They do this periodically throughout their time on board the orbiting complex. They train for basically 3 different major emergencies: fire, depressurization, and some sort of toxic release of chemicals or something. Today they were practicing exactly what they would need to do if they need to crawl into their Soyuz vehicles that brought the 2 different 3-member teams up to the space station and evacuate the complex. They spent about 3 hours doing that this morning. They had a debrief with the various ground control teams around the world to talk about how that drill went, and everything went according to plan. Kevin Ford and Tom Marshburn have spent the rest of their morning replacing the knee braces inside the Columbus laboratory. These basically help the crew members hold themselves in place as they're working on different types of experiments there inside the European laboratory. Obviously, there's no gravity up in space, so if you push on something, it pushes back on you, and you basically back away from whatever experiment you're working on. So you need to hook yourselves into and secure yourself there in the laboratory. So they are going through the process of replacing those knee braces that help them while they're working in that lab. Oleg Novitsky is refreshing some of the software on the computers inside the Russian segment. This is also done periodically just to keep those computers up and running, so he'll spend his morning doing that. Evgeny Tarelkin is continuing to stow some of the cargo that came up on the Progress 48. That specific cargo vehicle brought up about 2.5 tons of supplies for the crew, so it takes a bit to unload that Progress 48, which is currently on the bottom side. That is the Piers docking compartment on the bottom side of the Russian segment. You also see the Progress 49 there back at the back of the Zvezda service module, but the crew unloads all of that, packs it full of trash, and coming up in the next few weeks, those vehicles will be undocked and burned up in the Earth's atmosphere, full of trash that the crew no longer needs. Romanenko is working on an experiment today called the Siner Ocean Observations. This basically takes a look at the color contrast of the world's oceans as the space station flies above. They take photos of those, taking a look at the color of the water, and that is correlated to the fishing industry, taking a look at what kind of water and biological activity is going on down on the planet below. Tom Marshburn is spending his day working on the Capillary Flow experiment. This is something that's been ongoing on board the station. Basically, up in space, obviously there's no gravity, so it's a little bit difficult to control fluids and things like that. So scientists take a look at capillary flow, which is the interaction of liquid with a solid. You see it here on Earth as water or other liquid sort of crawls up glass and other types of materials. Scientists take a look at this phenomena up in space because it is actually not affected by gravity. So as they study that, they can hopefully one day come up with better designs for fuel systems on board spacecraft, also thermal control systems, and also wastewater management and other types of fluids. Chris Hadfield is working on what's known as In Space 3. This takes a look at different types of colloids, which is basically a solid that is inside a fluid. Those colloids tend to solidify whenever some sort of magnetic presence or a magnet is put up against it. This will help improve designs for bridges and buildings and things like that here on Earth, helping them withstand earthquakes and other trauma such as that. It also can be used in automobile designs. But those solids that are inside those liquids tend to create sediment or sort of settle out here on Earth, but that does not happen up in space since there is no gravity, so they study that to help improve the designs here on Earth. And finally, today work began on what is known as the RRM. This is the Robotics Refueling mission. This will be ongoing throughout the week. It is being controlled by the ground teams here in Houston and also the Canadian Space Agency. This activity is actually taking place out on what is called ELC-4, that is Express Logistics Carrier number 4. That is out on the right-hand side of the space station, basically directly below the Alpha Magnetic Spectrometer. This is a live view of Dexter, which is one of the robots on board the space station, and its arms operating on this activity board that is known as RRM. It is about the size of a washing machine. But what they're trying to do is demonstrate how you would refuel a satellite up in orbit. Whenever you launch a satellite, its lifespan is determined by not only how long the components last, but also how long the fuel on board lasts, since you can't really refuel the satellites in present day. But this activity board is going to put Dexter through a series of operations to snip some wires, unscrew some caps, and also transfer some simulated fuel later on this week. So Dexter will demonstrate not only how you would refuel a satellite that is designed for that to happen, but also how you would actually go up to one of these satellites that was never designed to do that, snip these wires, uncap this thing, and also try to refuel it. So Dexter will be going through the paces of that later on this week. The ground teams here in Houston are monitoring that, as well as the Canadian Space Agency, which obviously built the space station arm, and also Dexter itself. So that activity will continue throughout the week, and of course we'll have live coverage here on NASA television. This is Mission Control Houston. Welcome to today's ISS update. It is Tuesday, January 15th, 2013. This is a live view inside the space station flight control room here at the Johnson Space Center. This team here today is being led by Flight Director Matt Abbott. He is sitting there at the center console. Sitting beside him is Capcom Clay Anderson, veteran astronaut. He is the voice up to the crew and will be serving as such throughout the remainder of today in this Orbit 2 shift. The Expedition 34 crew on board the space station has a busy day today. Kevin Ford, the commander of the crew, has been working on an experiment called Elite today. This takes a look at the connection between brain visualization and motion while the crew is up on board the space station. Obviously, your motor skills and how you react to things is a little bit different up in space than it is here on Earth. So what they do is they set up a camera and record in 3 dimensions the motion of the crew members and how they react going through this type of experiment. They even take a look at how crew members would catch a baseball or something like that up on orbit, because as it happens, our brains are extremely wired to deal with gravity, and even though the crew members know that they're up in space, their brains sometimes still process things as if gravity still had an effect on things. So what they do is they study this, and hopefully will lead to better ergonomics and better spacecraft design in the future. So Kevin Ford will continue to work on that for the next couple of hours. Oleg Novitsky has been busy this morning working in the Russian segment on a crystal experiment that exists there. He is also going to be working on the Immuno experiment, which takes a look at how stress and long-duration spaceflight affect the immune system and different pharmacological ways of dealing with that. Evgeny Tarelkin himself has also been busy in the Russian segment. He has been taking some air samples, which is done periodically. They also take some surface samples as well, just to make sure that the air and the surfaces that the astronauts and cosmonauts touch and interact with are clean and acceptable. He's also going to be working later on this afternoon on the station's inventory management system. This is a fairly extensive system that keeps track of where everything is on board the space station. It is quite a large complex, and making sure that the crew members know and the ground teams know where everything is important. Chris Hadfield has been working with Tom Marshburn this morning on the iServe. This is a new experiment on board the space station that they are in the process of setting up. This is an automated system that is designed to capture images of the Earth's surface from on board the space station. It is primarily a means to gain experience and expertise in automated data acquisition, something that the crew members don't interact with, but is just automatically up and running. But it is expected to provide some fairly unique and useful images of the ground below for disaster monitoring and assessment, and also environmental issues down on the planet below. But what they're doing is setting up the Window Observational Research Facility, or WARF, which is a rack inside the Destiny laboratory. They're going to be installing a 9.25-inch telescope there in that window to point it down at the window below. And there's also a digital camera that is set up with that telescope, and then that experiment will be up and running. It's due to run for about 3 to 6 weeks, just depending on the weather patterns down on the Earth below. Obviously, they need some clear skies to capture images of the planet down below. But there should be about 60 individual data acquisition takes of this iServe experiment over the coming weeks. Marshburn himself has also been working inside the laboratory on some routine maintenance on the combustion integrated rack. This is one of the fire experiments on board the space station. The crew members periodically have to basically plug in some more fuel tanks and clean up the different pieces that make up that combustion integrated rack. So he is taking care of that today. And also beginning later on this afternoon, after we're off the air, activities will continue on the Robotic Refueling mission, or RRM. That activity began yesterday, will continue throughout the week. It is out there on the far right-hand side of the station's truss structure. And ground teams both here and at the Canadian Space Agency have been putting the Dexter robot along with the station's robotic arm through the paces. What this RRM does is it's about the size of a washing machine, and there's different tasks and different attachments there on the end of that. Dexter goes up there and pretends like it's servicing a satellite far out in orbit. It snips some wires, it removes some caps, and later on this week it is going to be actually injecting some simulated fuel there into that RRM practice facility that's out there outside the station. This is an important task for the space station to prove can be done, because whenever you launch a satellite, that satellite is limited by how long the parts are up and running and operational and healthy, and also how much fuel is on board. The majority of satellites don't have the ability to be serviced or refueled, but this RRM experiment is proving that that can be done as far out as 22,000 miles out away from Earth's orbit. And finally, today, a reboost of the station is planned for Wednesday night. That'll be tomorrow at 8:15 p.m. Central Time. This will be a 3-minute, 45-second firing of the station's Progress 49 thrusters. That is the cargo craft that is on the Russian segment of the station right now. And that will increase the station's orbit by 1 statute mile. This is setting up for the next Progress resupply ship that is coming up in February. That'll be the Progress 50, and it should be attempting a single launch today, docking with the International Space Station, arriving at the complex on the same day that it launches. The reboost should leave the station at an altitude of about 262.7 by 247.8 statute miles.
NASA has just decided to abandon one of the most historic structures in America, the launch pad where the first journey to the moon began. Launch Complex 39A was also the starting point for many shuttle flights.
West 2's Dan Billow takes us on a subterranean trip underneath that pad, where today he uncovered some of the lost secrets of Apollo.
Far beneath the tower of steel and mountain of concrete at Launch Pad 39A is a place rarely visited, a place that feels claustrophobic, smells dusty, looks abandoned. Back in the days when the echoes of Saturn V rockets boomed across the space coast, our old heroes were risking their lives to go to the moon. In the back of every mind was always the possibility that the Saturn V could explode during fueling. That's why these subterranean escape tunnels were built.
There was about 1 kiloton of explosive power up on that pad.
An astronaut or launch pad worker would come zooming out of this tube here after about a 9-story drop. And in this room, almost everything is rubber. They'd slide along this runway until they came to a stop. From here, the Apollo crew would go into the blast chamber with concrete walls 4 feet thick. They'd strap into a steel seat and hope to survive. I toured these forgotten underground passages for the first time because NASA is about to turn out these dim emergency lights for good.
Emotionally, it's very hard for people. We've had people that have spent 30, 40 years babying this system.
The launch pad was to be used for NASA's planned super rocket, but now those future launches will be limited to Pad 39B, the other former shuttle and Apollo launch pad. So the future of this pad, where Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins set sail on Apollo 11, may be to do nothing but rust, until nothing is left but the echoes. At the Kennedy Space Center, Dan Billow, WESH 2 News.
Good morning and welcome to Johnson Space Center. We have here today representatives from NASA and the European Space Agency to talk about a new agreement signed that's going to get ESA involved in the work on NASA's new spacecraft Orion that's going to take humans farther than they've ever been before. Here to tell us about that today, we have to my left Bill Gerstenmaier, who is the NASA Associate Administrator for Human Exploration and Operations. Then going down the line, Thomas Ryder, ESA's Director for Human Spaceflight and Operations. And Mark Geyer, the Orion Program Manager, and Bernardo Patti, who is the ESA Manager for ISS Operations. We'll let them start out with a little bit of introduction on what exactly is going on, and then we'll take questions here from the audience. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. As you described, the Orion capsule is the vehicle that's going to take us really beyond low Earth orbit and allow us to move human presence out into the solar system. And sitting behind that Orion capsule sits a device called a service module that provides some critical supplies and propulsion for the Orion capsule itself. And what we've done is we've got an agreement with our European partners to essentially have them develop the first service module and portions of the second service module for the Orion capsule. And this has been a really pretty amazing activity. We'll describe it and discuss with you more as you ask us some questions. I had the privilege today of attending a ceremony. We did an award ceremony for the Orion team and the European team for the amount of work that they've done in getting prepared to get to this moment. To make a commitment this big, there needs to be a lot of engineering done behind the scenes to make sure that this is really the right thing to go do. Can we really integrate these two vehicles together? Where do you define the interfaces? How do you make this happen? And the teams have done just a tremendous job over the past several months of figuring out all those technical interfaces. There were also intergovernmental agreements that needed to get put in place, some other activities that needed to be done, and we spent a little bit of time today to recognize the folks, the teams that actually did all that work. And it was pretty amazing just sitting there watching the awards get passed out from the Italians that were here, Europeans were here, NASA personnel were here, Lockheed Martin people were here, contractors were here, to see this international team come together and be this commitment. So what we're going to describe and what's represented by this signature is really much bigger than just a simple signature. It is really an integration of the service module with the Orion capsule as we move forward. So it was pretty amazing to see that. The other thing that was also intriguing was, this is part of ISS. Some of the funding for this is coming through the Common Systems Ops costs that are owed for the station partnership. So that enabled this cooperation. But I think more importantly than that financial piece is just the experience that was gained through the International Space Station. To build this wonderful facility we have on orbit, we needed to work a lot of technical issues, a lot of technical problems, and that experience gained and that trust that came between our European partners and our NASA teams allowed us to really go ahead and put together this service module agreement that you see today. So again, as we talk about space station being that first step in exploration, it is physically the first step in exploration, but I would say it also paved the way in terms of international agreements, international working together, contractors working together to really take that cooperation to a different level internationally. So again, just a tremendous day to participate in that awards activity, then to be here for this press conference. So I look forward to your questions, and I'll turn it over to Thomas for some opening remarks. Thomas?
Thank you very much, Bill. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Also from my side, I have to say this is a remarkable moment for ESA. You can imagine that the ISS cooperation in the past years has already shown some evolution, and this is another step of this evolution, as Bill already has explained here. I would even say it's a new page. We are opening a new page in the transatlantic cooperation. For ESA being involved in the building of a space transportation system, US space transportation system, which will give a perspective for humans to go beyond low Earth orbit. Certainly, low Earth orbit will remain a destination for us. We have a fantastic infrastructure in orbit, which we will be utilizing in the next years. To the end of this decade, certainly beyond this decade, there will be the need also to utilize low Earth orbit for various scientific reasons. But another aspect is, of course, to bring humans beyond low Earth orbit to new destinations. And this cooperation, I think, brings us into this endeavor. It is building upon ATV heritage, as we say. You are very well aware that ESA is providing supply vehicles to the International Space Station. The fourth of these ATVs will be launched in April this year. The last one will be launched next year, and based on the experience that we have gathered in ESA and European industry, we are now building upon that in the context of this cooperation. Also coming to this award ceremony this morning for, I think, both teams. From our side, certainly, it was a running start. ESA has been working after the last ministerial conference in 2008 on a concept study, ARV, and we very much benefited from this study to come together with a technical team from NASA to really pick up very quickly and prepare all the needed work in order to prepare the decision in our ministerial conference. Also, as a follow-up of this decision, there was an implementation agreement elaborated by both sides. It was endorsed by the US State Department. It was endorsed by the ESA Council in December last year, and now we are really set to go ahead. We are very much aware that a lot of difficult and complicated work is still ahead of us, but that is very inspiring, and I think all of us are looking forward to this fantastic endeavor.
Thank you. So it's a great day for Orion. We get to add key experience on the ESA side that, as Mr. Ryder mentioned, came from their ISS experience in ATV and before. I thought it was important for us to be clear on terminology, so I've got a slide to show a little bit. There you go. Go ahead and go to the next. Okay. Very good. And it might be hard to see, but these would be available to hand out. When we talk about the different parts of the Orion, it's really important, I think, to pull on the part of how important this ESA element is to the Orion mission, and also relate it to the definition of the different parts of Orion. So obviously at the top is the crew module, and I'll talk a little bit about that later, and a little bit about EFT1 in a minute. But there are other elements of the Orion that make up the service module. So the service module is really everything below the crew module, and now we've shaded the stuff in gray that will remain with NASA. There's a crew module adapter, which is a very tight tolerance with the heat shield, so we're going to retain that piece. And there's fairings and an adapter to the launch vehicle that we're actually going to fly on EFT1. And in this deal, we leave that with NASA, right? I think that's the best economical thing to do, something we've already built, we're going to keep. But ESA now will provide that core, as you see, kind of the highlighted white area in there in the middle, which has the propulsion, power generation, radiators, consumable storage. So obviously it's a key part of the service module function. Most of the gray will fly on EFT1, and the ESA part will allow us to move on to EM1, which is the flight in 2017. So Mr. Ryder said it very well. We didn't just start yesterday on this. The team has been working this concept for a while. We actually did a system design review last year. They're here this week, actually working details to get us to a preliminary design review and to move us forward. I think it's great that we're using the ISS experience, not just technically, but working together. A lot of the same experts are working on both sides, and we get to apply that to this great exploration mission. Orion, of course, is not just a PowerPoint picture like that. We're actually flying in 20 months. EFT1 is flying in 20 months, and we're down at the Cape installing hardware as we speak and doing software testing in Denver. So it's a great time, exciting time for us, both near term and also now with this great new agreement becoming more international as we go beyond low Earth orbit. Bernardo?
Well, just a few remarks. I would like to say that, yes, thanks to the approval of the program by our member states and by the signature of the implementing arrangement between NASA and ESA, now we are starting to ramp up our teams. We are placing industrial contracts, and we are facing the very challenging schedule that will bring us to PDR by the second part of the year. So all the team are extremely excited and enthusiastic to carry on in this endeavor. And they are here this week, making good progress. And we look forward for the PDR to confirm that all the expectations that we are building up are going to materialize further. Thank you very much.
Okay, we're going to take questions now. We'll start here in the room with the reporters in attendance, and then after that we'll take questions from the phone bridge. We can start with Mark Rowe.
Thanks. Mark Rowe for Aviation Week. This puts ESA in the critical path for the early development of the Orion and potentially the rest of the SLS and so forth. I wonder if you might talk about the significance of that. That's a different element in the development, and what does that mean in a big picture sense? And I think that's for Mr. Gerstenmaier and Mr. Ryder.
Again, I think you characterized it very well. We put ESA in a critical path, and we don't do that lightly. So as we talked about, we did this. We had this team set up to go review and understand how we would go put all this together. And as Mark showed you in the graphic, we were also pretty smart about how we picked the interfaces. So if you look at the way the interfaces are picked, the primary load carrying capability is through that spacecraft adapter, through those jettisonable fairings on the outside, then up to that Orion module adapter that is critical with the heat shield. So that primary load path is through the outside. So that helps ease some of the integration activities. So we didn't want to give them a technical challenge that would be so difficult that it would be almost impossible for them to pull this off. So we worked very closely. And what's interesting is it wasn't just the NASA teams. We actually brought in the contractors that are going to be doing this work, and we had them help us figure out where to put those interfaces. So we put them in the critical path. I would tell you we probably would not have done that without the experience we've had in Space Station. In Space Station, we've learned the real meaning of cooperation. It isn't actually not counting on your partner to be there. It's actually giving up a piece of the spacecraft or the piece of the work that you're going to do and actually counting on that partner to deliver. So this wasn't done lightly. I'm confident that the ESA team and the industrial team and the NASA teams and the contractors teams can deliver on this thing. But this will build us that first step. So when we talk about international cooperation, it's not talked about lightly here. We are really doing international cooperation, and as we push humans out into the solar system, we're doing it internationally, and this is that first step. So I think it's, it's not 100% comfortable, but I'm never 100% comfortable, so it's okay, and we'll see how it goes, but we've done it smartly. And Thomas, anything you want to add?
Yes, thank you very much, Bill. I would just like to stress again what also you, Bill, have mentioned before. I mean, exploration in future, I think, will become more and more an international endeavor. When we are talking about cooperation, it is not just because of political reasons, but we are looking for synergies in technical, in programmatic way. And that is a very, very good example exactly in that context. As I mentioned in my introductory statement, ESA has proven to be a reliable partner in the context of the space station program. We are operating together with all ISS partners, our infrastructure in orbit. And I think based on that, based on specifically the ATV heritage, I think this is a good choice to make in order to exploit synergies that have been developed in the past and that can be beneficial for reaching common objectives.
Okay, Kevin.
Captain Quinn from
KCRK here in Houston. For Mr. Gerstenmaier, number one, you mentioned that you're not 100% comfortable with this. Can you expand on that, please, and explain why there's still that lack of 100%? And then number two, can you explain also for folks at home, big picture, what does this mean for our ability to get beyond lower Earth orbit for the first time in 40 years?
Yeah, I guess, you know, my comfort words are really kind of my words, right? In our world, you know, we're really pushing challenges, and we're doing things that have really not been done before. You know, this capsule we're talking about is going to go beyond the distance to the moon. We're going to go extend beyond that. It's going to eventually be the vehicle we will use to go to asteroids and to Mars. And if I told you today I'm comfortable with all this stuff and all the design sits there, you should be asking me, how can you be comfortable? And so I think as a common person looking forward, these are challenges, but we're not foolish, right? And that's why we chose the interfaces where we did. That's why we had the contractors talk to each other to evaluate up front to make sure things that are all right that are there. We've got a very tight schedule to do it, as Mark and Bernardo talked about, the preliminary design review later this year. I mean, that is really fast in terms of development. But again, we've done a lot of preliminary work up front. We're taking advantage of some heritage hardware, so all that works. But I'm a realist in the fact that I know that this won't be easy. And if I was comfortable and I was up here, then you should be questioning me what's wrong with me. So the fact that I tell you I'm uncomfortable, that's exactly where I want to be. That's where I want my team. I want them pushing. We're going to be innovative, creative, push forward, and work in an international and cooperative manner, and we'll do that. But it doesn't say you have to be comfortable when you go do that.
Okay, Gina?
This question is for Bill and for Mark. How tough is it to design a system like this when you don't know exactly where you're going? You know you're going to go to the space station, but you don't know if you're going to the moon or Mars or an asteroid. I mean, Mark, when I interviewed you last year, the plan was an asteroid. Well, you know, how do you design a vehicle when you don't really know where it's going to go?
You know, I would say we have the basic requirements understood. We know what change in velocity or how much propellant this vehicle needs to carry. We know what its basic structural load capability is. We know how long the life support systems need to be there. We know how many crew we're going to carry. So we know all those parameters. So, you don't design a car to just go to the grocery store. You design a car that can go to the grocery store and go to the shopping mall and maybe drive across the country, do other things. So it's the same kind of thing here. As engineers, we take those basic requirements to do these multiple destinations, these multiple locations, and we're building a system that will allow us to go explore those. We no longer want to build a system that is optimized for one particular destination. We want a system that can actually push human presence out into the solar system and allow us to go all these different destinations. So what we've done is we've broken that down into the requirements that allow us to capture all these destinations, scarred some interfaces to grow a little bit in the area. So I think the teams are very comfortable with what we've laid out in front of them, and they understand the requirements they need to build to.
Yeah, Bill said it great. I would just add, so this vehicle has a lot of capability to do a lot of different missions. When you talk about volume and delta V and ability to carry crew, it's really got a lot of flexibility. So we participate in those architecture studies that happen at headquarters as they talk about new missions to make sure that we understand what if any updates we would need to make. But even at this point, even with all those different discussions, our plans for EM1, EM2 haven't changed because this is a very capable vehicle.
Okay, I don't see any other questions here in the room, so we'll come back later for follow-ups, but for now we'll go to our phone bridge. We'll go in the order that you called, and if you could be sure and address your question to the person who'd like to answer it, that would be helpful. We'll start with Lisa Grossman from New Scientist. Lisa, you may need to take your phone off of mute if you haven't. Okay, we're going to move down to Brian Bastag from Washington Post.
Hello, this is Lisa from New Scientist. Are you still there? Did I miss it?
Yes, go ahead, Lisa.
Okay, great. I was wondering if you could lay out a little bit more clearly which parts of the vehicle are going to be NASA-based and which are going to be ESA-based, and what that means.
Sure. Can you see the graphic where you are?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I think they put up the right one. There's a picture of it. The stuff in gray, if you look, I had kind of had them gray it out, so it was a little easier to delineate. That is the NASA and Lockheed built spacecraft pieces. What you don't see on there is the launch abort system, which is where obviously NASA is retaining as well. But the gray parts, which again are the command module, and then really structural interface pieces, the fairings, the spacecraft adapter to the launch vehicle, and then that crew module adapter, which interfaces with the heat shield and the crew module. So the white part there, again, is the core piece, and ESA is providing that. And as I said, it has the solar arrays. You'll notice also in the pictures now, the Orion will look different. The arrays look a lot like an ATV, so I think that's a visual representation of this agreement and the changes that we're making. The radiators are on that part of the spacecraft, obviously the key propulsion elements. There's storable consumables for the crew and so forth are in there. So a lot of key elements that will be provided by ESA.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
And how is this different from what was being planned before?
Before, the entire element that was in white was a NASA Lockheed element that would be provided. So again, this deal is for EM1. So for the first flight, this white highlighted area will be provided by ESA. In the past, the entire vehicle was a NASA Lockheed vehicle.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, now we'll go to Brian from the Washington Post. Okay, I don't hear anything from Brian now. We'll move on to Amy Spitak from Aviation Week. And everybody be sure and mute your phones after you've finished asking your questions.
Hi, my question is, I guess for Mr. Gerstenmaier or Mr. Geyer. Will development of the module include flight-ready spare hardware for missions beyond the 2017 flight? And if so, who is going to own that hardware? And will European industry be involved in those missions, even if it means additional costs, or would production of the module stay in the U.S.? Thank you.
The agreement includes this, the highlighted area in white will be provided by ESA. That includes a sparing, what you call a rational sparing plan, where you buy one of a certain set of items so that if something breaks in manufacturing or testing, we have spares for that. So that's the agreement. ESA also agrees to support the sustaining engineering of that element, so as we're doing testing or flying it, that they'll have the expertise needed if we have questions. Of course, it's a highly integrated vehicle. None of these pieces fly by themselves. In fact, the CM and the SM don't fly by themselves other than the last few seconds after separation. So it's a highly integrated vehicle. We'll be tied to the hip from now until through the flight with engineering, and ESA is supporting that in their plan.
And in terms of the kind of the future activities, we really haven't defined that at this point. We've set up for the EM1 mission, as Mark's described. We've got some spares, key components for EM2. We'll see what we want to do with that mission, and then beyond that, we've protected both ways. We've made sure that we've kept the right intellectual property that's available to us on the NASA U.S. government side, that we can manufacture the follow-on service modules if we need to on our side, or if we decide that it's advantageous to us to continue in those future flights with the Europeans, we can work with the Europeans to do that. So we've really made no decisions about those future flights. We think it's important to set this up on the first flight and then plan kind of for that transition second flight. And then beyond that, we'll work together again as an international team and figure out what is the best thing for us in terms of human exploration, and we'll figure out the way to do that as we go forward.
Okay, we'll go next to Ken Kramer with Spaceflight Magazine.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. I guess I'm wondering about the ATV, maybe for Thomas Reiter. How much of the EM2 SM module would you build? And I wonder if an ESA astronaut might be aboard that flight, which I think is going to go to the moon in 2021 or 2022?
Well, thank you very much for this question. As you can imagine, I mean, I addressed in my introductory remarks that this cooperation opens new perspectives for bringing humans beyond low Earth orbit. And certainly this is one of the areas where I will start discussing with Bill what possibilities there are. But at the moment, I think we are focusing really on the technical work that needs to be done. There are programmatic implications, and certainly this is one of the things we are having on our list to discuss for the future. I think it would be a fantastic opportunity. I said before that this exploration in future is more and more becoming an international endeavor, and in that sense I think a kind of international crew would also testify that, as it does today on the International Space Station. But once again, for the moment, our focus is really on doing the technical, the programmatic work that is ahead of us.
Great, thanks. And maybe for Bill Gerstenmaier or Mark Geyer, are there any significant changes you have to make to the Orion in order to integrate the European vehicle? Thanks.
Yeah, great question. So we've worked really well together as far as getting the requirements set up so we can minimize that, and we want to make sure that the Orion performs as we've committed that it'll perform. So as far as its performance, it'll be the same. So that's great, and the team's done a great job. Obviously, there'll be some difference in the structural interface. If you look at if you remember that picture where the highlighted white area now interfaces with that crew module adapter, those on the Lockheed design were one structural piece. So there'll be some difference as we figure out, as we work together on how to attach those pieces, and ESA provides it, and then we do this assembly. But I'd say that's the major piece. We've also updated some computer interfaces, and yet we're going to use the same network interface protocol, so that makes it a lot simpler for us to work together. So I think the team's done a great job in minimizing those.
Okay, next up is Marcia Dunn with the Associated Press.
Yes, hi, good morning. This question's probably for Mr. Gerstenmaier, but I was hoping to get the latest details on what the exploration mission 1 and 2 will entail. Could you just give the latest rundown on that? And I have a follow-up, please.
Yeah, EM1 and EM2 at this point, you know, we conceptually talk about them going to the vicinity of the moon. And that's a pretty broad space, and then we're still looking at what the details are of what we want to go really do with those missions. Are there any things that we want to do in those areas? But it turns out for the initial SLS configuration, that's a very reachable space for us with the SLS configuration. So I would say at this point we're looking to cislunar space in the vicinity of the moon, and we'll probably put some more details together as I described earlier.
Thank you. I'm wondering if you have a target date for the second mission, and a bigger picture question might be, we hear about L2 outposts corralling an asteroid. What's your preference? What would you like to see the long-term, or I guess short-term, long-term plan for the Orion and SLS?
In terms of major flight milestones, we have the 2014 exploration flight test, which will really be the kind of the first flight of the major Orion systems, and also really stress the heat shield as we look at reentry heating of that capsule at about 80% of lunar velocity return kind of speeds. That will inform the critical design review for Orion. Then we have the EM1 mission in 2017, in late 2017, and then we have the first crewed mission of the Orion SLS system in 2021. And those are the basic missions that we've laid out. And in terms of my own personal preference, I really don't have one. What we're doing is we're really looking at all these different options that you've described and you've written about. We'll take a look at all those. We'll try to figure out which one is the best one to go do. And when we figure out that it's the best one to go do, and by best, that's in the eyes of a whole variety of different stakeholders, of which I try not to take an opinion. I lay out the data and we let them decide, and therefore I'm not disappointed. So I won't pick a position, but I'm excited about getting beyond low Earth orbit. I'm excited about getting to the vicinity of the moon. we really have a lot to learn. You know, we went to the moon with Apollo. We went in very focused missions. We didn't really spend a lot of time looking at what it really takes to do operations in deep space. We're very comfortable now, at least in low Earth orbit with the International Space Station. We've had crews on orbit continuously for about 12 years. We understand stable orbit rendezvous. We understand navigation in low Earth orbit. There's a lot to be learned in deep space. And how do we protect our crews? How do we look at return trajectories? How do we look at redundancy in systems? You know, Orion's designed to have some leak in the capsule and still return safely from the moon. That's a tremendous design feature. How do we exploit those features and move forward? So I think, again, we have lots of things to discuss. We'll make those known as soon as we can let them know. They make sense to tell us that that's what we want to go do. But for now, I think it's best we kind of look at all those and look at the advantages and which one allows us to move further and faster into exploration in deep space.
Thank you.
Okay, next we'll go to Dan Leone with Space News.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having us. I've got one for Mr. Gerstenmaier, one for Mr. Ryder. I'll start with the one for Bill. Is there going to be any ESA hardware on the EFT-1 flight next year? And then separately, Mr. Ryder, since you're over on this side of the pond this week, does this deal have any implications for a possible common crew exploration vehicle that ESA's talked about before?
Okay, first of all, on EFT-1, I'll have to ask Mark. I don't believe there's any ESA hardware on EFT-1, but Mark can confirm that.
No, there's not. Again, we're really, that flight is all really about the crew module and about key separation events. So we'll do a launch abort system SEP, and the fairings will also separate. So it's really, the rest of it is all about the crew module. So it's this ESA hardware is not flying on that flight. This ESA hardware helps us get to EM1, where we need a fully capable service module.
Okay, so to answer to your question related to kind of common crew exploration vehicle, no, this is now the focus from an ESA side. Let me address in this context that our Director General has decided or decided on 3 strategic destinations. Those are low Earth orbit, represented of course by the International Space Station, Moon, Mars, for the moment robotic exploration, but of course with the ultimate goal of human exploration. In the past, yes, we have been doing various studies in the direction of supporting or complementing exploration activities with European infrastructure, making use of the Ariane 5, making use of the ATV. However, this is now where all these activities are basically convening in this cooperation in MPCV. Now, of course, I think this is not the end of the game. This is the start of extended cooperation, and of course we can imagine that in the further path we can expand on that. But once again, I think for the next years till 2017 there's a lot of work ahead of us, and I think this is what we at the moment will really focus on. And the scenarios that will come then beyond, I think your questions, the other questions that have already indicated what will really be the destination then, that will be solved as we go along. At the moment, I think it is important to point out that we find additional synergies, that we build on expertise that is also available with the partners, and that we have actually with this way a vehicle that has a certain operational flexibility in the sense of what destinations then will be chosen.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Okay, next is Stephen Clark with Spaceflight Now.
Hi, thanks. Just a couple of questions. First of all, for Mark Geyer, maybe, whose responsibility is the engine for the service module? Is that NASA responsibility, and what type of engine would that be? And I have a follow-up.
Yeah, good question. The main engine, we're going to use the ohms from the shuttle. We have those left over from the shuttle. We were going to do that. The NASA side was going to do that anyway. And so now that we made this deal, it made a lot of sense, given that we had an engine that had this performance and capability to make it part of this agreement. So we'll provide the ohms engine to ESA, and they'll integrate it into their propulsion system.
And a follow-up to you, Mark. Could you walk through some of the milestones this year for the Orion EFT1 testing at KSC, and also could you discuss the cracks that were found in the aft bulkhead? Have those been repaired, and what was the cause of that? Thanks.
Good. Okay. Yeah, a lot of key milestones. So we've got a loads test where we'll actually pressurize the element and then apply load to the outside of the structure to make sure the structure, we're getting the responses we expect before we put all the hardware on board. That'll probably be in the middle of February this year. We're doing the avionics testing in Denver. We'll run through the next version of the software here in the spring. That's key because we're actually testing the power on and functional testing of the software in our lab in Denver before we actually use it on the vehicle in the ONC in Kennedy. So that'll be in the spring of this year. In the summer of this year, we'll actually power on the avionics in the crew module, and we'll deliver the heat shield itself. So those are big milestones. And then toward the end of this year, we'll actually finish and get ready to deliver the element to the launch vehicle folks. So a ton going on this year. Across the country in different subcontractors and pieces of Lockheed and NASA across the country. So it's a huge amount of work this year. Yeah, as far as the cracks go, it's a very complex primary structure because it sees a lot of different driving loads, whether it's a landing load, a pressure load, an abort load. So it's a complex design. The team's done a fantastic job. Given that it turns out that there was an area in the crew module where we underestimated some things like shrinkage of the weld and behavior of some of the materials. And so in that case, we didn't realize we were closer to the margins than we expected in one area on the vehicle. Of course, we had cracks that were maybe, I don't know, ½ an inch big. They never penetrated the pressure vessel, but you don't want cracks, and that's why you do the test. We've come up with a great plan to basically bridge over those cracks to distribute the load so that we won't see any issues on orbit. As Bill called them dustpan, it's a doubler, so it's basically a piece of metal that kind of looks like a fan. There may be 2 of them to distribute the load to a bigger area. We'll basically bolt those onto the aft bulkhead inside, and it'll distribute the load, and then we'll be able to do the loads test. We have the design. We're finalizing the analysis now to make sure we're not making stress load worse in other areas as we bolt this thing down. That's normal when you do a doubler on aircraft or spacecraft. That work will fit in within that loads test I described because we have a lot of other work to get ready for the loads test, a lot of other hardware to install that is going on in parallel while we work this crack repair design. So like I said, we'll have that ready to go before we do the loads test in the middle of February. And when in the loads test, as I said before, we will pressurize the element. So we'll test it again. We'll make sure that the repair is good along with doing the rest of the tests of the load test. So yeah, good question. A lot going on.
Okay, next up, Peter DeSelding.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. I think my question is for William Gerstenmaier and Mark Geyer. At least to start, first, did I understand you to say that the IGA had already been signed with ESA? If I understood what happened at the ESA Council in November, the agency only committed to the station for the next couple of years and only a little over half of the funding they need for the service module. So maybe you could give us a clarification of the status there.
In terms of the service module agreement, there's an implementing agreement, and that has been signed by both parties, both by NASA and concurred on by the appropriate government agency. So that's in place, and that sets us up to go do all this technical work and all this activities that we described going forward.
Okay, is it a concern for you that they've only approved a little more than half the money they need for this service module?
I don't know if Thomas can address that. I mean, we'll let Thomas talk, and then we'll see.
I think this is the normal process in ESA. We have clearly made with a decision on embarking on this post-ATV5 barter element, a commitment to support station operations till 2020. Now, as in other agencies, I think the commitments for the respective funds are distributed over time. And for the moment, this is the first part that has been committed in the past ministerial in November last year. And the next part will be then decided upon in 2014. So I think this is just the normal way how ESA is deciding on its budgets for not only ISS exploitation, not only for MPCV, but for all programs. And I think in that respect, there is a clear path forward, and there is a clear commitment on a really basic programmatic ground for the time till the end of this decade.
Okay, next we're going to go. Thanks. Next, we're going to go to Clara Moskowitz with Space.com. And Clara, if you haven't unmuted your phone, you may need to do that. Okay, we'll try instead Bill Harwood with CBS.
Thank you very much. And this is just a follow-up on Peter's question. For those of us who don't track ESA's budget as closely as we maybe track NASA's, what cost figure should go on this, the current agreement, if it's funded throughout through the first flight and the components that are planned for the second? What sort of money is involved here? Thank you very much.
Okay, I have to say at this point, are a little bit reluctant to really talk about financial figures. It is about 60% that has been committed now for the first part. Till 2014, the second share, which is a smaller one of about 40%, will be committed then in 2014. And the overall value, okay, I think this figure is known. It has been published before, is in the order of 450 million euros.
Thank you.
Okay, and last on the list, we have Jim Hillhouse from American Space.
Yes, thank you for letting us talk to y'all. This question is for Mr. Gerstenmaier and Mr. Geyer. There's been some talk about Orion being overmassed. What is NASA thinking about doing to handle some of those issues? And does NASA see any problems with reaching the goal of, I believe I read that it was 4,000 pounds over what the parachutes can handle?
Yeah, great question. When we look at that number, what that really is you take my unmanned flight test article that we're going to fly in 20 months, and if you then add all the crew and all the systems that you would need to fly on EM2, then you add that all up, and we're in that, the crew module itself is in that 4,000 pound range that we've got to reduce. But we're not flying EM2 tomorrow. We have a plan today to get to an EM2 weight that will meet the parachute requirements and also meet the mass requirements that allow us to meet our objectives on EM1 and EM2. In other words, you have to be light enough that the engines can push you and get to the places you want to get to. So we have those targets from Dan Dumbacher, who of course is my boss at headquarters and who actually owns this integrated SLS Orion. We have those targets. That the Lockheed NASA team have already allocated those targets to the different systems that we know need to get lighter before we fly EM2. And we also had a bunch of work even as soon as the last couple of months, and we had a big meeting in December where we talked about specific updates that we'll do for EM2, including primary structure, some with the heat shield, and other areas of the vehicle that we know we can reduce the mass on and meet the targets. So mass is going to be a challenge. If you remember on Apollo and the LEM, it was a big deal because any pound of mass you try to accelerate from low Earth orbit to the moon and then get it home and land it, you got to multiply by 9 all the systems that have to support it. In other words, the service module and then the upper stage and then the rocket and everybody else that has to push that mass. So mass is an extreme premium. It wasn't Apollo. It was a challenge for them. We have plans to get to EM2, but mass is going to be something that we are going to watch every day, and we're going to have options for reducing all the way up until we launch. And remember, in Apollo, as they flew, they learned more and more about the loads and environments they were seeing, and they were actually able to add capability. Remember the first lunar lander, I think Apollo 9, that LEM could not have actually landed on the moon and done the mission, but within 2 flights, they figured it out, got the mast down, and by the end of flying Apollo, they were actually flying buggies on these landers. So this is part of why EFT1 is so important. We've got models, we've got a lot of experience. We're going to fly the crew module on EFT1. We're going to put it at 3,000 miles. We're going to push it into the atmosphere. We're going to land it under the chutes. We're going to get a ton of data about the loads we experience and the environments we saw, and that's going to tell us a lot about where our margins are on the vehicle that now we can attack and get ready for these manned missions. So we have a plan. It's going to be aggressive. It's got to be aggressive, and it's going to be one of the key things we're going to be watching all the way until we fly people. So it's part of the fun of engineering, of making this happen, right? It's not simple. It's not a simple system.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll try real quick again on the 2 that we missed. Brian Vastag from the Washington Post. Okay, or Clara Moskowitz from space.com. Okay, since we don't hear from either of them, we'll take any follow-up questions here in the room, starting with Mark Carreau.
Thanks, Mark Carreau for Aviation Week again, and I think I'm asking for clarification on a couple of things, just because I might be a little confused. I want to make sure I understand the hardware that's involved in this agreement is for the 2017 flight, and then partial hardware for the next one. And also want to understand the barter agreement where you're working off of the space station in order to do this, and whether this agreement accelerates any of the development for Orion and the service module. I'm just looking for some way to say what each side is giving without without talking about the dollars.
Well, I'll start with what is in this current agreement, which is again for EM1, and it's the systems in that highlighted white area. We are providing some pieces like the main engine, some other propulsion hardware we're actually providing, and some network cards. So there's some cats and dogs that we also provide to close this deal. But that's basically it. ESA does provide spares for EM1. Now, if we use them, because sometimes you have a spare, sometimes because you break something. If we use them, we'll use them on EM1. If we don't use them, that hardware can be applied to EM2. So when Bill's talking about spares and beginning for EM2, it can be those things. Hopefully we won't break the stuff and we'll have it available for EM2. So that's the key. To me, the essential part of this is not whether we accelerated something or not. It's actually initiating international partnership beyond low Earth orbit. That's really the key. Certainly, ESA provides capability here, but we also now have some increased integration, because we're separated. And so that's really what I'd say. It's not really accelerating stuff, but basically initiating this new exploration plan with ESA involved in this first flight.
I think it's also important to note that, we're not reducing the Lockheed Martin contract value. It stays where it is. They'll have to actually do probably some additional work that they hadn't planned. So they won't have to do this service module work, but they'll have to do some integration work associated with bringing this hardware together. So there will be some additional cost associated with that. But then there's some other activities that were phased a little bit later that Lockheed was going to go do that we'll make sure get done in this earlier time frame. So I'm not sure it really, we got to be careful how we talk about this. I'm not sure it really saves us money, but what it does is I believe it builds us a more robust development schedule, because it allows us to essentially move some work that would have been late, and if we would have found a problem in that work late, then that's tough to recover from to try to make a particular launch date. So it allows us to kind of work smarter within the contracts we have to make sure we're going to get to those dates, the 2017 and the 2021 date, with more robustness. So we got to be careful. We shouldn't try to go look at what's ESA's contributing and then try to subtract that out of our budget and say we're getting there. We're actually getting a better, more robust design by cooperating together. So the beauty of this is it's helping ESA essentially use that, instead of just building an ATV that it was dedicated solely to space station, they're now getting a capability that can be used in a variety of exploration activities into the future, and Thomas can talk about those. So that's a big advantage to ESA. The advantage to us is that it brings in international agreements and international working right at the beginning. So then that gives us a different flavor of what we may do with some of these follow-on missions, some of the questions you were trying to tease out earlier. This gives us a chance to experience some of that early on and then make smarter decisions, and it also allows us to have a more robust overall design to help us meet our original commitments for EM1. So in a way, this is a win-win for both of us, but it does create a new interface that didn't exist before, and that interface has to be carefully managed, or you negate all those good things I just described.
Maybe some very general remarks about barter arrangements, which so far have been a very important element in this International Space Station programs. Think about the nodes that have been provided by ESA, some other hardware that we have been bartering either with NASA or also with our Russian partners. So I think in general, as a kind of international cooperation, the barter is a very important element. Now, specifically for ATV, as you might recall, in March 2011, the ESA Council decided upon not to continue with ATV 6 and 7, but it would have been basically a replication of the same, where we are in a phase where it actually would be prudent really to do a redesign of major system components or even move into something new. And that was exactly the moment where we started the discussions with NASA if we can barter our common station operating costs and other services in that way. So I think an excellent example where really this barter was really beneficial for both sides, as Bill just explained, from NASA perspective and from our side, really to use ATV heritage to strategically, of course, engage in a direction beyond low Earth orbit in exploration, and really to build on this expertise which shares and saves some of the efforts.
Just if you could just clarify, I wanted to make sure that I understood if there was some contribution to the space station that now shifts to this project, or this is sort of a new start, as it were.
What's intriguing is that the basic framework of the space station, the folks that put together the agreements at the very beginning, it actually says for space station or exploration. So what's really amazing is whoever negotiated and put together all those fundamental agreements recognized that station would be this first step going forward. So that gave us the ability to go ahead and do what we've just done through this implementing agreement. We had to formalize it in an implementing agreement, but the basic framework was enabled by the basic documentation with station. So we see this as an advantage, and it's really. This is really exploration. So we talk about station as being the first step in exploration. This is really that evidence of that first step in exploration, not just the physical hardware and understanding astronaut health or long duration microgravity. This is also showing how we can use our understandings, our working relationships, our contractor relationships together to move forward.
Okay, and I think we also have a question from the NASA social media online.
Yes, we received a question from @DHolzhauser on Twitter. There doesn't appear to be any extended HAB capability. Are there any hooks to add longer duration habitation capability?
Yeah, and again, what we've been focused on here is we're building the Orion capsule and the SLS vehicle, and then at some point, if we're going to go further destinations beyond, say, cislunar space or to an asteroid, to Mars, those kind of destinations, we're going to need some habitation capability or some larger volume for the crew to actually live in. And then the rescue capability, return capability comes from the Orion capsule. So we do at some point need to start looking, once we start picking destinations, we need to go look at what other hardware elements we need to add, such as a habitation module, et cetera, as we start picking those other destinations. So that's a good point, and we'll go look at those. The other thing I think I would also stress too is, we did this arrangement with the European Space Agency. We're also looking with our other partners throughout the International Space Station program, and then through other exploration activities, looking at partners even beyond the the ISS team to see if there's other contributions that folks might want to be interested in making to help us move into exploration. Because I truly believe exploration beyond low Earth orbit is going to have to be international in activity, and it won't be bilateral. I think you'll see us reaching out to other partners moving forward to find ways to put things together that help us both achieve what we want to go do. So again, if you go all the way back to Station, the beauty of Station was we had a shared common vision. We wanted a research facility in low Earth orbit. Then we figured out how internationally to put together an arrangement that allowed us to actually implement and build the International Space Station. Now today, you're getting to see kind of that first step as we look beyond low Earth orbit. This is that first step in international agreements, which I think will be much larger than even the station international agreements as we move forward in exploration to build all these other systems that was asked in the question that we're going to need to go do these things beyond low Earth orbit.
Okay, thanks for that question.
Maybe
Sure.
If I may complement to what Bill has just mentioned, to the part of habitation module, I think in that context it should also be pointed out that we are using ISS apart from the research objectives that we have as a platform for technologies that are exactly going in that direction. Also on international level, there is a working group, International Space Exploration Working Group, which is looking at different roadmaps in order to define the next steps and the technologies needed. So I think in this context, we should also still remind ourselves that we are using ISS also as a platform for technology exactly in that direction you were mentioning.
Okay, thanks for that question. And you can find other social media outlets for NASA online at nasa.gov/connect. Any other follow-up questions here in the room? Okay, since I don't see any, I think that wraps up our briefing for today. You can find photos, videos, and more information about this and other Orion-related news online at www.nasa.gov/Orion. And we'll go back now to the regular NASA TV programming, but tune in tomorrow for the ISS Expedition 35 and 36 briefings, which begin at 11 a.m. Central, and that's following our daily ISS update. Thanks so much.
Kleines Quiz. Kommt Ihnen dieses Gejaule vertraut vor? Ja, es ist das Einwählgeräusch eines Internetmodems. Viele Jugendliche kennen es gar nicht mehr.
Wisst ihr, was das ist?
Nee, nicht wirklich, nee. Keine Ahnung.
Unmenschlich, solche Geräusche kenne ich nicht.
Dabei war das doch die Hymne des Internets in den 90ern.
Papagei oder sowas.
Eine Antenne, die den Kontakt zum Sender verliert.
Das Modem. Eines von vielen Geräuschen, die vor gar nicht so langer Zeit zu unserem Alltag gehörten. So wie die ratternde Wählscheibe. Oder das Schnurren des Kassettenrekorders. Um diese vom Aussterben bedrohten Geräusche kümmert sich seit einiger Zeit das Museum of Endangered Sounds im Internet. Ein Geräuschreservat für alte Computerspiele, Schreibmaschinen und Telefone jeglicher Art. Ein Fan dieses Museums ist der Klangkünstler Lasse Rieck. Auch er setzt sich für diesen speziellen Artenschutz ein. Begibt sich in den Dschungel von Flohmärkten und Trödelläden. Wie hier in Hamburg-St. Pauli.
Wenn man jetzt davon ausgeht, dass das alles aussterbende Geräusche hier sind, dann liegt das natürlich daran, dass die kaum noch im Einsatz sind. Ja, auch hier sind sie ja nicht mal verkabelt. Also wir hören sie nicht. Also man kann jetzt, wenn man sich nicht direkt damit beschäftigt, nicht zuordnen, wie klingt hier der Leitz. Der sieht ja auch fast aus wie ein Tier.
Dieses Tier der Marke Leitz ist ein alter Filmprojektor aus den 30er Jahren. Und lebt sogar noch. Voll funktionsfähig. Muss gerettet werden. Mit dabei hat Lasse deshalb ein mobiles Tonstudio. Mit modernster Technik wird das rhythmische Rauschrattern des alten Geräts für die Nachwelt konserviert.
Für mich ist es einfach auch ein Interesse, das nicht nur als isolierten Klang zu sehen, sondern auch als Musik. Also was mir hier zum Beispiel an dem Gerät wirklich gefällt, ist das gesamte Objekt und dass verschiedene Dinge hier klingen. Also man kann das sehr schön sehen durch die einzelnen Drehungen, dann sozusagen die Schleifen, wo das Band durchläuft.
Gerettet wird auch das Knipsen einer alten Polaroid. Und zum Schluss nimmt Lasse noch ein Aufnahmegerät mit seinem Aufnahmegerät auf. Mal ehrlich, sind die Geräusche von Dingen, die keiner mehr besitzt, wirklich ein Verlust für die Menschheit? Naja, nicht immer. Aber ein bisschen Wehmut ist eben doch dabei, wenn man vergessene Geräusche wieder hört und sich erinnert an das erste Mixtape oder die Feiern im Partykeller. Oder?
Die kleine Seejungfrau setzte sich auf das Dach der Lokomotive.
Das Museum für bedrohte Geräusche. Diese Nostalgiemaschine im Netz hat übrigens der Legende nach dieser Nerd entwickelt. In Wirklichkeit stecken dahinter 3 Designstudenten aus den USA. Bis 2015 wollen sie sämtliche Geräusche retten. Auch Lasse will seine Sounds jetzt hochladen. Als Fan des Museums freut er sich beim Geräuscheretten dabei zu sein.
Ich bin auf jeden Fall froh, habe mich gefreut, dass es eine Initiative gibt und dass auch viele Geräusche schon gesucht, gefunden und aufgenommen und hochgeladen sind.
Und so ist auch ein weiteres Geräusch gerettet. Gerade noch rechtzeitig vom Aussterben.
Vor wenigen Minuten hat US-Präsident Barack Obama seinen Plan vorgestellt, mit dem er Waffenkäufe in den USA erschweren will. Insgesamt umfasst der Katalog 23 Punkte. Unter anderem will Obama ein Verkaufsverbot für Sturmgewehre durchsetzen, ebenso ein Limit für die Patronenanzahl in Magazinen und verschärfte Kontrollen von Waffenkäufern auf mögliche Vorstrafen oder psychische Krankheiten. Obwohl einen Monat nach dem Schulmassaker von Newtown viele Amerikaner die Pläne des Präsidenten unterstützen, gilt die Zustimmung des Kongresses zu mehreren Punkten als fraglich.
Amerikas Präsident macht ernst. Einen Monat nach dem Amoklauf in Newtown mit 28 Toten hat Barack Obama ein ganzes Paket an Maßnahmen verkündet, mit dem er das Waffenrecht verschärfen will. Unter anderem sollen Sturmgewehre verboten und alle Waffenkäufer überprüft werden. Gegen Obamas Pläne droht jedoch heftiger Widerstand im Repräsentantenhaus. Aus Washington, Ulf Röller.
Ich bin Annas Mutter. Ich habe damals 2 Kinder in den Bus gesetzt, nur eins kam wieder. Promise, Versprechen heißt Initiative der Eltern der getöteten Kinder von Newtown. Einen Monat nach dem Amoklauf haben sie eine Botschaft an die Nation. Was ich erlebt habe, soll niemand mehr erleben müssen. Sowas darf nie mehr passieren. Viele Kinder haben Obama nach dem Amoklauf geschrieben, etwas gegen die Gewalt zu unternehmen. 4 davon hat er ins Weiße Haus eingeladen. Vor ihnen steht ein Präsident, der sich der mächtigen Waffenlobby anlegt. Wir müssen jetzt handeln, im Namen der getöteten Schüler und Lehrer. Sie hatten das ganze Leben noch vor sich. Genau wie die vielen Männer und Frauen im ganzen Land, die jeden Tag Opfer sinnloser Gewalt werden. Obama will Sturmgewehre und Magazine mit mehr als 10 Patronen verbieten. Außerdem soll jeder Waffenkäufer überprüft werden. Dafür benötigt der Präsident allerdings die Zustimmung im Kongress. Die Republikaner sind dagegen. Ich halte es für unwahrscheinlich, dass es dafür eine Mehrheit gibt. Die Waffenlobby NRA geht jetzt in die Offensive, stellte gerade ihr neues Ballerspiel für Kinder ab 4 Jahren vor. Doch wegen heftiger Proteste ist es jetzt erst ab 12.
Das Bild täuscht. Umgeben von Kindern, die ihm nach dem Schulmassaker in Newtown geschrieben haben, geht Präsident Obama zum Angriff über auf Amerikas Waffenlobby. Obamas Ziel, die erste Verschärfung der laxen US-Waffengesetze seit fast 2 Jahrzehnten. Wenn wir auch nur ein Leben retten können, dann ist es unsere Pflicht, das zu versuchen. Mit den 23 Verordnungen, die er selbst unterschrieb, erreicht Obama nur Randbereiche des Waffenproblems. wie effektivere Hintergrundchecks in Waffengeschäften, strengere Verfolgung von Waffenkriminalität und eine Art Frühwarnsystem für Fälle, in denen psychisch Kranke versuchen, sich zu bewaffnen. Jede drastische Verbesserung der Waffengesetze muss der Kongress beschließen, weiß Obama. Aber selbst die eigenen Demokraten scheuen den Kampf mit der Waffenlobby. Obama will Hintergrundchecks auch für die rund 40% aller Waffenkäufer, die sich bei sogenannten Waffenshows und bei Privatleuten eindecken. Verboten werden sollen auch halbautomatische Sturmgewehre und Magazine mit mehr als 10 Schuss. Die Waffenlobby macht schon mobil, nennt den Präsidenten in dieser TV-Werbung einen elitären Heuchler, weil er seine Töchter vom Secret Service bewachen lässt, aber gegen bewaffnete Sicherheitspersonal in Schulen ist. Ein republikanischer Abgeordneter droht Obama sogar jetzt schon mit einem Amtsenthebungsverfahren.
And welcome back. You're watching CNN Newsroom. The U.S. owns more guns than any other country, and it is a huge part of American culture. So it is no surprise that this latest gun control debate has stirred emotions among people on both sides of the issue.
Congress should restore a ban on military-style assault weapons and a 10-round limit for magazines.
I call on Congress today to act immediately to appropriate whatever is necessary to put armed police officers in every single school in this nation.
Now, one person who's been fired up about this is CNN's very own Piers Morgan. Take a listen to him with one of his guests.
He fired
Explain to me
over
why
100 rounds,
Yeah.
and he killed 20 children.
Right.
20 children between
look where it
5
happened.
and 10. At what
Excuse
point
me.
do you gun lobby guys say, we get it, it's time for change?
I'm here to tell you, 1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearms. Doesn't matter how many lemmings you get out there on the street begging for them to have their guns taken. We will not relinquish them. Do you understand?
Well, that was conservative radio host Alex Jones, who we just heard speaking, and he started a petition to deport Piers Morgan over the CNN host's strong criticism of U.S. gun laws. Now, that petition received more than 100,000 signatures, but Piers, a British journalist, responded that he would consider deporting himself if the laws don't change.
We wanted to give Piers a chance to explain his views, and he joins us now live from New York. Piers, great to have you on the show this morning. Before we get to those strong views and sort of your views about what is going on there in the States, I just want to get your take first on the gun control laws that have now going before Congress and what the president is planning. Broadly, do you think he's got it right?
I definitely do, and in fact, the president's just echoed really the kind of measures that we've been calling for on the show now for the last few weeks since the Sandy Hook massacre, because I think he recognises what many people here feel, which is when 20 young children get murdered in that grotesque manner, something has to give. You can't just continue to do nothing about the gun crisis in America. And it is a crisis. 300 million firearms in circulation and a gun murder rate of between 11 and 12,000 Americans every year. Do you know nearly 1,000 Americans have been killed with guns since Sandy Hook? That puts into perspective, really, the scale of what is going on here. And I think the measures the president's calling for are eminently sensible. There is no reason why any civilian anywhere in the world needs an AR-15 military-style assault rifle that can pump 100 bullets in a minute. That's what was used at Aurora, at the movie theater massacre, at Sandy Hook, with those poor children. Each one was hit between 3 and 11 bullets. These are killing machines, and it's that kind of thing that the president wants to see taken off the streets. And what rational human being would agree with him?
Absolutely, and you don't need a 15 if you're going duck hunting or whatever. I want to ask you whether you saw the latest CNN poll. It's a CNN Time ORC poll. And one of the questions was, would stricter gun controls actually cut violence? 61% who answered that poll said no, it wouldn't. So you have a mindset in the States that says, to me at least, that they don't equate, or a lot of Americans don't equate gun control with cutting violence. How do you explain that?
Well, unfortunately, it's a direct result of the NRA's vocal power and their financial power and the way that they have cowed the politicians into saying nothing about this. So the NRA, after every massacre, come out and say, if everyone in that movie theatre or that school or that mosque or whatever it may be had been armed, the shooter would have been killed. So what happens then is that many thousands of Americans rush out in fear and they arm themselves with the very weapons that have been used and get loads of ammunition. And so the spiraling descent into what I view as gun madness continues, when surely the rational response to the kind of gun crime America sees, and by the way, it's not just about murder. 18,000 Americans a year, on average, kill themselves with guns at home. Now, how many of those would kill themselves if there weren't guns in the home? The answer, even for those who are against gun control, is significantly less. And there are parallels here. In Australia and in Britain in the mid-90s, both suffered terrible massacres involving guns. Both countries brought in very strict gun control, and both have seen very, very low numbers of gun murders. In Britain, in 2011, there were 39 gun murders in England and Wales in 1 year. That is the daily rate of gun murder in America. So that is the difference. In Australia, they have a similar rate to Britain. And they also have far less suicide now with guns and far less gun crime generally. So this argument that the only answer to gun crime is more guns is, in my view, not just wrong, but it's dangerous, and it's done deliberately to stir up commercial well-being and increased profits for gun manufacturers, which is what happens.
Now, Piers, certainly those numbers that you just mentioned speak for themselves, but then there are those who say that there are valid reasons for law-abiding citizens to keep guns. We actually heard from a conservative commentator a bit before. Let's take a listen to what he had to say and then get your reaction to that.
Assault weapons are 2% of gun violence in this country. And what more on the background checks, it doesn't account for the fact that, you know what? Criminals don't care about laws. They break the law. They steal the weapons they seek to get.
So, Piers, he's saying only 2% of these crimes are being committed by assault weapons.
Well, he's right, but unfortunately, the assault weapon has become the preferred weapon of mass shooters. The last 4 mass shootings in America, at Aurora in the movie theater, the single biggest single shooter incident in the history of the United States, 70 people hit, 12 killed. Then you had one at a shopping mall in Oregon, a number of people killed with an AR-15 again. Then you had New York firemen lured to their death and slaughtered with an AR-15, and Sandy Hook, 20 children, 6 adults killed with an AR-15. So although they are a small percentage of the overall gun deaths in America, they are the preferred method of mass shooting and mass slaughter. And still no one can tell me why any civilian needs them. You can't go hunting with them. They destroy things. They destroy deer, they destroy boar, they destroy humans. And so they have no place in civilian life. But in relation to the other issue here, which is not the assault weapons and mass shootings, but general gun crime and gun killings in America. 100,000 Americans a year, on average, get hit by gunfire. There are 300 million weapons in circulation, so you can't take them all back. A confiscation program wouldn't work as it might do in a smaller country with less firearms out there. You've got to be sensible and pragmatic. I respect an American's essential self-belief in the Second Amendment of their Constitution, that they should be allowed to have a handgun or a pistol or a shotgun at home to defend themselves and their family. But I will never accept that that right extends to assault weapons that can commit mass killing and slaughter young children. And so there are 2 debates. One is, how do you regulate handguns, for example, that get in the hands of criminals and gangsters? And I think the president's outlined the plan there for universal background checks. What that commentator didn't say is that 40% of all gun trades in America have no background checks. Nothing. Nobody has any idea who these people are who are getting their hands on these weapons. No wonder it's such indiscriminate, almost Wild West stuff out there. So these are sensible proposals. I just don't see any logical argument why these wouldn't make America a safer place.
So, Piers, you certainly have been a big voice on this gun debate. What does it feel like to become part of this story?
Well, I've been trying to make this a big issue on my show since I went on air 2 years ago, and the reason was that the week before I went on air, Gabrielle Giffords, the congresswoman, was shot in the head, attempted murder. She miraculously survived. 6 other people, including a 9-year-old girl, were killed. And I assumed after that, if that had happened in Britain, there would have been a national outcry of such ferocity that the laws would have changed within a month. But nothing happened. And so I carried on air, and every few months, another massacre, another mass shooting, another appalling incident. Chicago was out of control with hundreds of gun murders erupting every few months, and nothing ever got done. And the reason is that the NRA, the National Rifle Association, wield this incredible power over the politicians here. And the reason for that is, in any red state in America, the NRA will fund and finance a campaign against a politician who has a record of supporting gun control. And that has got to change. There's got to be a different system that means the NRA can't affect the political system in America in the way that they do, where you can have a massacre like Sandy Hook, and already almost every Republican congressman and woman in Congress has made it clear they're not going to allow any more gun control. It's just complete lunacy.
Exactly, and Joe Biden himself is admitting it's going to be a very, very tough path for some of, at least some of those, I mean, about the banning assault weapons to actually get through Congress. Piers, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks for joining us so much this morning here on CNN Newsroom.
Yeah, great speaking with you. Thanks, Piers.
It's great to be on. Thanks for having me.
Mitten in der Londoner Innenstadt ist heute ein Hubschrauber abgestürzt. Der Pilot hatte offenbar wegen tiefhängender Wolken einen Kran übersehen, der auf einem Hochhaus montiert war. 2 Menschen kamen ums Leben, 12 wurden verletzt. Aus London unser Korrespondent Ulrich Oppold.
Es ist ein Inferno mitten im Berufsverkehr. Der Hubschrauber stürzt taumelnd zu Boden und explodiert. Brennende Trümmer fliegen herum, Passanten laufen in Panik durcheinander. Ein Autofahrer wird in letzter Sekunde aus seinem brennenden Wagen gerettet. 12 Menschen werden zum Teil schwer verletzt, ein Passant am Boden und der Pilot sind sofort tot. Peter Barnes war ein erfahrener Pilot. Er hatte sogar schon Stunts in James-Bond-Filmen gedreht. Heute früh flog er allein die Themse entlang Richtung Finanzviertel. Die Sicht war schlecht. Er bat deshalb um eine andere Flugroute. In diesem Moment erfasste der Rotor den Baukran auf dem Wolkenkratzer.
Es grenzt an ein Wunder, dass hier heute früh nicht mehr passiert ist. Denn etwa 50 Meter entfernt nur von der Absturzstelle ist eine Bahnlinie, auf der morgens im Berufsverkehr die vollbesetzten Pendlerzüge im Minutentakt fahren.
Der Kranführer hatte einen besonderen Schutzengel. Er wollte gerade in sein Führerhaus klettern, als der Hubschrauber dicht über ihm in den Ausleger krachte. Die Unglücksstelle ist immer noch weiträumig abgesperrt. Die Polizei befürchtet, dass der Kran abstürzen könnte.
Schock für die Londoner heute Morgen. Ein Hubschrauber ist mitten im Berufsverkehr im Zentrum abgestürzt. Im Stadtteil Vauxhall krachte der Helikopter auf mehrere Autos und ging in Flammen auf. 2 Menschen kamen laut Polizei ums Leben, der Pilot und ein Passant. Mindestens 13 wurden verletzt. Grund für den Absturz: der Hubschrauber war in dichtem Nebel mit diesem Kran am Rohbau eines neuen Hochhauses kollidiert.
Amateuraufnahmen von der Unglücksstelle kurz nach dem Absturz. Überall brennende Teile des Hubschraubers und 2 Autos, die von der abstürzenden Maschine getroffen wurden. Teile des brennenden Hubschraubers fielen auf ein Auto, überall rannten Leute. Ein Motorradfahrer stürzte in dem Chaos, Fahrräder lagen herum. Es war fürchterlich. Der Fahrer des Autos kann angeblich von der Feuerwehr im letzten Moment gerettet werden. Für einen Passanten und den Piloten aber kommt jede Hilfe zu spät. Der 51-Jährige galt als erfahren, hatte auch in zahlreichen Filmproduktionen wie James Bond oder Lara Croft Hubschrauber geflogen. Das Unglück ereignete sich mitten im Zentrum Londons. Südlich von Westminster entsteht zurzeit der St. George Wharf Tower, ein 180 Meter hohes Gebäude mit Luxus-Apartments. Hier ein Bild kurz vor dem Unglück. Vermutlich hatte der Hubschrauberpilot im Nebel den Ausleger des Baukrans übersehen und war mit ihm kollidiert. Anschließend stürzte er etwa 100 Meter entfernt mitten im Berufsverkehr auf eine Straße und explodierte. Es gibt insgesamt 11 Opfer, 2 davon tot, 1 im kritischen Zustand, die anderen 8 mit leichten Verletzungen. Hinweise auf einen terroristischen Hintergrund gibt es nach Polizeiangaben nicht. Die Maschine vom Typ Agosta 109, hier ein baugleiches Modell, war im Landeanflug auf den innerstädtischen Hubschrauberlandeplatz Battersea, knapp 3 Kilometer von der Unglücksstelle entfernt.
Eröffnung erst 2015? Der Berliner Hauptstadtflughafen wird wahrscheinlich erst in 2 Jahren fertig sein. So jedenfalls schätzte der Technikchef des Flughafens, Horst Amann, die Situation des Großprojekts heute ein. Die Fertigstellung im Herbst 2014 könne nur unter optimalen Bedingungen funktionieren. Unterdessen hat Brandenburgs Ministerpräsident Platzek den Posten als Aufsichtsratschef beim Flughafen übernommen.
Jetzt heißt es, der neue Hauptstadtflughafen wird 2015 eröffnet, aber Konkretes erfahren wir erst in einigen Monaten. Was für eine Blamage. Heute ist nun Rainer Schwarz als Geschäftsführer rausgeflogen. Wer auch immer sein Nachfolger wird, ist nicht zu beneiden. Und eigentlich wäre der Vertrag von Schwarz noch bis Mai 2016 gelaufen. Bekommt er jetzt also womöglich noch 1 Million in Abfindung? Für die Öffentlichkeit wäre das wohl nur schwer zu verstehen, auch wenn es nicht das erste Mal wäre, dass Versagen am Ende noch mit einem goldenen Handschlag belohnt wird. Thomas Berding mit den neuesten Entwicklungen aus Berlin.
Schluss mit dem Theater, Schluss mit dem Theater. Der Staatsanwalt hat das Wort.
Eine Anklage muss Klaus Wowereit aber nicht befürchten, obwohl er für das milliardenteure Flughafenchaos verantwortlich ist. Für die Leute hinterm Zaun ist das nur schwer zu verstehen, dass das andauernde Versagen nicht bestraft wird. Brandenburgs Ministerpräsident Platzek, auch einer der Verantwortlichen, wurde heute zum Aufsichtsratschef befördert. Gehen musste ein anderer.
Herr Schwarz hat sein Dienstzimmer beräumt und den Betrieb verlassen.
Der Rausschmiss von Flughafenchef Schwarz ist keine Überraschung, denn auch er hat maßgeblich dazu beigetragen, dass das Großprojekt komplett aus dem Ruder gelaufen ist. Doch er wird seinen Abgang verschmerzen können. Eine Abfindung von über 1,8 Millionen Euro soll dem passionierten Golfspieler zustehen. Draußen bei den Demonstranten sorgt das natürlich für Empörung.
Das ist in der Art eines Lottogewinns für ihn. Und das vor dem Hintergrund des Versagens, was er an den Tag gelegt hat, ist einfach unerträglich.
Der goldene Handschlag für Nieten in Nadelstreifen ist aber keine Berliner Erfindung. Nein, dass krasses Versagen auch noch belohnt wird, ist weit verbreitet. Dirk Nonnenmacher werden Untreue und Bilanzfälschung vorgeworfen. Der Ex-Chef der fast pleite gegangenen HSH Nordbank darf trotzdem seine 4 Millionen Euro Abfindung behalten. Oder Georg Funke. Er führte die Bank Hypo Real Estate in den Ruin und klagte auf 3,5 Millionen Euro Abfindung. Und der Thyssen-Konzern hat jetzt 3 Vorstandsmitglieder mit jeweils 3 bis 4 Millionen Euro abgefunden, trotz milliardenschwerer Fehlentscheidungen. Der Abfindungswahnsinn für unfähige Manager ließe sich noch lange fortführen.
Das anlasten müssen Sie zunächst einmal den Vertragsgestaltern. Und das sind 2 Partner. Das ist einmal ein Vorstand, zum anderen der Aufsichtsrat. Hier wird also der Aufsichtsrat sich fragen lassen müssen, ob er moralisch-ethisch einwandfrei gehandelt hat, wenn er solche Zustände zulässt.
Einige DAX-Konzerne begrenzen inzwischen die Abfindungszahlungen auf maximal 2 Jahresgehälter. Aber auch das ist bei offensichtlichen Versagen viel zu viel. Der geschasste Berliner Flughafenchef Schwarz wird bereits aufgefordert, auf seine Abfindung komplett zu verzichten. Schwer vorstellbar. Aber auch der neue Chefaufseher Platzek verspricht, neue Wege zu gehen. Er will sich externe Experten in den Aufsichtsrat holen. Mehr Sachverstand der Pannenflughafen sicher gut gebrauchen.
Deutschland beteiligt sich beim internationalen Militäreinsatz in Mali. Es stellt zunächst 2 Transportmaschinen vom Typ Transall zur Verfügung, außerdem humanitäre Hilfe für die Flüchtlinge. Die französischen Soldaten kämpfen inzwischen nicht mehr nur aus der Luft, sondern offenbar auch am Boden gegen die Islamisten. Ines Trams.
Frankreich macht ernst und schickt Bodentruppen von Malis Hauptstadt Bamako aus Richtung Norden. Es heißt, französische Spezialkräfte seien bereits in direkte Kämpfe mit islamistischen Rebellen verwickelt. Vor allem geht es um die Rückeroberung der Stadt Diabali, derzeit in der Hand von Islamisten. Die westafrikanische Staatengemeinschaft ECOWAS will die Franzosen mit Soldaten unterstützen. Sie sollen nun von 2 deutschen Transportflugzeugen ins Land gebracht werden.
Wir sind bereit, Truppen der ECOWAS-Staaten nach Mali zu verbringen, und zwar nach Bamako.
Eine kleine Lösung, nur 2 Transall ohne medizinische Ausstattung, ohne Ziel nahe des Kampfgebietes. Die Kanzlerin verteidigt das. Diese Kapazitäten wären frei, ohne andere Einsätze zu gefährden. Der ECOWAS-Vorsitzende Ouattara will nun die Truppen zusammenstellen. Es gibt die Gefahr, dass die Terroristen auch in andere Länder gelangen. Deswegen ist das ein Problem der internationalen Staatengemeinschaft, nicht nur von Afrika. Bis auf die Linke tragen die anderen Parteien den Einsatz mit. Doch insbesondere die SPD bemängelt, dass die Regierung kein Mandat des Bundestages einholen will.
Wir sind der Auffassung, Paragraph 5 des Parlamentsbeteiligungsgesetzes hätte uns hier helfen können. Das lässt nämlich bei Eilbedürftigkeit eine Entsendung zu und das Parlament kann nachträglich diskutieren und legitimieren.
Derweil wächst die Zahl der Flüchtlinge in Mali. Deutschland sagte heute zu, 1 Million Euro an Hilfe zur Verfügung zu stellen.
Der Schnee bei uns lässt nicht locker. Ganz Deutschland liegt mittlerweile unter einer weißen Decke. Die Folge auch heute: hunderte Unfälle auf glatten Straßen. Zum Glück blieb es meist bei Blechschäden. Im Berufsverkehr sorgten heute Morgen verunglückte oder querstehende Lastwagen allein in Nordrhein-Westfalen für rund 400 Kilometer Stau.
Guten Abend, liebe Zuschauer. Der Winter hat es geschafft. Fast überall liegt eine geschlossene Schneedecke in Deutschland. Es ist nicht allzu viel in den Niederungen. Maximal 12 cm in Düsseldorf, aber teilweise eben nur eine hauchdünne Schicht von 1 cm. In den Mittelgebirgen ist ein bisschen mehr, also Erzgebirge 40 cm oder 50 cm, im Schwarzwald 70 cm. Und es kommt ja noch mehr dazu. Heute Nacht bei knackigem Frost -2 bis -12 Grad und gerade im Norden und Nordwesten und Westen wird es am kältesten. Da klart es zum Teil auf. Ansonsten haben wir ja noch starke Bewölkung. Da wird es immer wieder ein bisschen schneien. Am Alpenrand noch am stärksten und auch morgen geht das weiter mit Schneefällen in Deutschland. So, Schwerpunkt wird allerdings nur noch Bayern sein. Ansonsten lassen die Schneefälle mehr und mehr nach und vor allem im Nordwesten und Westen ist es dann trocken, kommt vielleicht auch mal ein bisschen die Sonne raus. Wollen wir es einfach hoffen. Der Wind ist ein bisschen kräftiger, weht mäßig aus Nordost und damit kommt von der Ostsee etwas mildere Luft. Die reicht bis Berlin, also um 0 Grad, meist sind es aber -2 bis -5 Grad. Ja, kommen wir zur Schweiz. In den Alpen schneit am Freitag kaum noch Schnee, ein bisschen mehr Sonne in den Alpen, aber Samstag schon wieder Schnee, vielleicht auch Glatteisregen in der Schweiz und auch im Westen Deutschland fängt es wieder an zu schneien. Noch ein Blick auf die Wetterlage zeigt uns, im Süden schüttet es. Es regnet förmlich hier rund ums Mittelmeer, allerdings nach Norden hin ist auch sehr viel Schnee dabei, zum Teil Schneemassen hier auf dem Balkan, auch in den nächsten 24 Stunden. Wir haben die Kaltluft aus Nordosten und hier dieses Regenband über Westeuropa morgen Abend. Ja, das bringt uns am Samstag, Sonntag von Westen wieder ein bisschen Schnee. Vielleicht auch kurzzeitig eine Milderung. Sonst aber erst einmal Frost, der sich bis zur Atlantikküste fast ausweitet und ans Mittelmeer. Das gefällt den Palmen dort nicht, aber die halten das aus. -5 bis -10 Grad, 1-2 Tage, kein Problem. Und so kalt wie im Norden wird es ja auch nicht. Zum Schluss noch mal ein Blick auf China vor ein paar Tagen. Smogwerte, die letztendlich sehr extrem waren. Man konnte hier, Peking liegt etwa hier, gar nicht erkennen unter diesen grauen Wolken, also Abgase von Kohlekraftwerken. Heute war es ein bisschen besser. Hier liegt es, Peking, und trotzdem noch Smog. Und wie es in den nächsten Tagen weitergeht, ist ungewiss. Wahrscheinlich wird es wieder dicker. Ich wünsche Ihnen noch einen schönen Abend und machen Sie es gut.
Flugzeugbauer Boeing bekommt immer mehr Probleme mit seinem Langstreckenflugzeug Dreamliner. Im japanischen Takamatsu musste heute eine Maschine notlanden. Der Bordcomputer hatte Batterieprobleme und Rauchentwicklung gemeldet. 137 Passagiere mussten die Maschine über Notrutschen verlassen. 5 wurden leicht verletzt. Es ist bereits der 3. Zwischenfall mit einem Dreamliner innerhalb einer Woche. Die beiden größten japanischen Fluggesellschaften haben inzwischen alle Dreamliner-Flüge gestrichen.
The grounding of 787 Dreamliners in Japan. Boeing has delivered 50 of the new generation airplanes so far, with 24 of those delivered to Japan Airlines and All Nippon Airlines. Boeing has orders for more than 800 planes and hopes to double its delivery in 2013. And that's led some to question everything from the design to the decision to outsource a lot of the manufacturing. I want to bring in Mary Schiavo now. She is the outspoken former Inspector General of the U.S. Transportation Department and the author of Flying Blind, Flying Safe. Thanks so much for being with us. Let me ask you, first of all, would you fly aboard a Dreamliner today?
No, I would give it some time to work out the problems. This is similar to the situation we had back in '95 with the certification of the 777. There were a lot of glitches to be worked out. There were some electrical problems. And at about the 18th month mark to 2 years, the problems were all worked out. It became a very reliable airplane. But right now, there are just too many things happening. And even if you don't have to have an emergency evacuation like on ANA, you do have a chance of a scheduled disruption. So I'd give it a little bit of time.
Well, for concern about your schedule or concern about your safety? I mean, one of the issues involved, one of the issues involved is these batteries. There have been a number of different mishaps, cracked windscreen, fuel leaks, but batteries that set themselves alight, potentially burning at 1,000 or 2,000 degrees, enough to melt the shell of the airplane. What do you make of that?
Well, it's very disconcerting because now this is the second event, at least the ones that we know of, where this battery caused fire in Boston and now an emergency evacuation. And initially it was thought that there was fire suppression in that particular equipment bay. As on wide bodies now built in the United States, you must have fire suppression in the cargo holds and the inaccessible areas. But this particular area did not have fire suppression. So you've got battery problems catching fire, and then an issue concerning once it catches fire, can it be put out readily? It's just very disconcerting, and there needs to be some answers about those batteries before they continue to use them.
I'm really struck by what you're saying, because you're an expert. You're saying you'd stay off these planes because you don't think they're safe enough, and that the batteries, when they start on fire, there's nothing in the plane that will put the fire out. That's astonishing that those planes are still in service.
Well, it's astonishing that we've had these problems with these batteries. This is a new use for them. They did go through, Boeing obviously went through a very lengthy airworthiness process with the Federal Aviation Administration. I guess I was most concerned last week when the Federal Aviation Administration announced that it was unsure of its process. It was relooking at some of the plane issues with Boeing because the FAA said it wanted to assure itself. Well, you know, it's the job of the FAA to be sure when they certify a plane, and so I think everybody's, at least on this side of the pond, saying, look, FAA, were you sure or were you not?
So and they didn't do the job properly the first time, is what you're saying. What should they really be looking at now? Obviously, the batteries are a good place to start, but they should they be looking top to bottom and re-examine everything on that craft?
That's what they say they're doing. They're looking at the design process, which so far doesn't point to design. They're looking at the provisioning process. Who made these parts and supplied them to Boeing? Because remember, Boeing assembles. They don't manufacture most of the plane. And then finally, the assembly process, where there's mistakes in assembly. The battery does not look like an assembly problem. It looks like a manufacture problem or maybe a design. But the electrical problems look like perhaps to be an assembly issue. So the FAA says they're looking at all three processes, top to bottom, and that's going to take a while.
Well, let me jump in one last quick question. Have they been lucky so far? I'm wondering about what happens if they have one of these battery fires on a long-haul flight in a place they can't put the plane down.
Right, on the battery issue, they've been lucky, and we certainly hope that their luck holds. We don't want, obviously, anyone harmed. But on some of the other issues, you know, such as the wiring issues or the cracked windshield happens in lots of planes. Fortunately, they are able to put those down. But the battery and the fire issues is very, very disconcerting, because in those situations, if you're in the air, you just may not have enough minutes to get on the ground.
Mary Schiavo, former Inspector General of the U.S. Department of Transportation, says she wouldn't fly the Dreamliner. It has been lucky. Things haven't been worse. Thanks so much for talking with us.
Thank you.
Wenige Sekunden nach der Notlandung im japanischen Takamatsu. Die Piloten wollen kein Risiko eingehen. 137 Passagiere und Crewmitglieder werden über Notrutschen in Sicherheit gebracht. An Bord des Dreamliners der All Nippon Airways war 35 Minuten nach dem Start Rauchgeruch bemerkt worden. Warnanzeigen meldeten Probleme mit einer Batterie. Vor der Notlandung hat eine Stewardess eine Durchsage gemacht und ihre Stimme bebte. Da dachte ich wirklich, das sind schlechte Neuigkeiten. 5 Passagiere wurden leicht verletzt, doch es hätte weitaus schlimmer kommen können, etwa wenn sich ein Brand schneller ausgebreitet hätte. Auslöser war erneut eine der modernen Lithium-Ionen-Batterien, die den besonders großen Strombedarf der Boeing 787 sicherstellen. Sie sind deutlich leistungsstärker als bei anderen Flugzeugen, können aber leichter in Brand geraten.
Es gab ja einen vergleichbaren Fall, allerdings am Boden, bereits letzte Woche in Boston bei einem Dreamliner der Japan Airlines. Da wurde gestern das Foto veröffentlicht von der amerikanischen Ermittlungsbehörde der verschmorten Batterie. Und die sieht in der Tat ziemlich schlimm aus. Also da hat es wirklich offenbar eine Art Schwelbrand gegeben.
Und das sind nur die jüngsten Zwischenfälle in einer ganzen Serie. Mal bildeten sich bei einem Dreamliner Risse in der Cockpitscheibe, mal gab es Probleme mit dem Bremscomputer, dann wieder verloren Triebwerke, Treibstoff oder Öl.
In den letzten 2 Wochen ist ja einiges passiert und alle diese Vorfälle, die stehen nicht in einem systematischen Zusammenhang. Die sind alle so unterschiedlich.
Auch kleine Fehlerquellen können dabei fatale Kettenreaktionen auslösen. Das hat auch Konkurrent Airbus beim ebenfalls neuen A380 mehrfach zu spüren bekommen. Eine Qantas-Maschine entging sogar nur knapp der Katastrophe, als Triebwerksteile die Tragfläche durchschlugen. Nicht auszuschließen, dass Zeitdruck und Konkurrenzkampf sowie die große Zahl internationaler Zulieferbetriebe das Risiko solcher Zwischenfälle erhöhen.
Das haben wir jetzt zum zweiten Mal gesehen bei der 787 nach dem A380 schon, dass hier offenbar auch etwas im Argen liegt und dass das einfach generell dazu führt, dass häufiger wirklich neue Flugzeuge aus dem Ruder laufen und man wirklich nicht garantieren kann, dass, wenn ich als Passagier einsteige, ich davon ausgehen kann, ich komme pünktlich und heil ans Ziel.
Boeing könnte mit der 787 nun vor einem gigantischen Problem stehen. Denn weil das gesamte System des Dreamliners von den leistungsstarken, aber fehleranfälligen Lithium-Batterien abhängt, müsste im schlimmsten Falle das gesamte Flugzeug neu konstruiert werden. Das würde Jahre dauern, sehr viel Geld verschlingen und hätte noch weitaus gravierendere Auswirkungen aufs Renommee von Boeing als Pannenserien und Notlandungen.
Breaking News in den Hauptnachrichtensendungen. Die amerikanische Flugaufsichtsbehörde FAA befiehlt allen Dreamlinern bis auf Weiteres am Boden zu bleiben. Nachdem gestern eine Boeing 787 der japanischen Fluggesellschaft ANA in Takamatsu notlanden musste, weil sich im Cockpit Rauch entwickelt hatte, war die rote Linie überschritten. Die FAA musste handeln. Bislang liegen uns zwar keine Erkenntnisse vor, dass das Flugzeug generell nicht sicher ist, aber wir haben Sicherheitsprobleme erkannt und müssen handeln. Die Pannenserie reißt nicht ab. Gebrochene Scheiben am Cockpit, der Brand einer Bordbatterie auf dem Flughafen in Boston. Keine Bilder, die Vertrauen schaffen. Vor allem die Lithium-Ionen-Batterie macht Probleme. Sie ist leicht und leistungsfähig, droht aber schnell heiß zu werden und Feuer zu fangen. Noch ist unklar, ob die Batterien selbst oder die Elektronik für die Pannen verantwortlich sind. Ausgerechnet Japan, der größte Abnehmer, zweifelt nun an der Sicherheit des Dreamliners. Der Flugstopp der US-Aufsichtsbehörde hat eine Kettenreaktion ausgelöst. Weltweit müssen 787-Maschinen für unabsehbare Zeit am Boden bleiben. Für deutsche Fluglinien hat dies keine Konsequenzen. Bislang fliegt in Europa nur die polnische Lot, die umstrittene Langstreckenmaschine.
Seit 1979 zum ersten Mal erteilt die amerikanische Luftfahrtbehörde ein Flugverbot. Andere Behörden haben sich angeschlossen. Also der Dreamliner bleibt auf dem Boden. Was heißt das für Boeing wirtschaftlich?
Also zunächst mal ist es ein Rufschaden. Das heißt, es ist ein dickes blaues Auge, sowohl für Boeing als auch für die Marke Dreamliner 787. Was es jetzt finanziell heißt, das wird sich zeigen, weil die Flieger sind ja noch in der Garantiephase und deshalb muss Boeing den Verdienstausfall und auch die Finanzierungskosten natürlich seiner Kunden übernehmen. Und da können Sie mal davon ausgehen, das ist so pro Dreamliner und Monat würde ich da mal fast $500.000 ansetzen. Das heißt, je länger das dauert, umso teurer wird es. Wobei es natürlich im Augenblick noch nicht abschätzbar ist, wie lange das dauert und woran es halt auch liegt.
Das Unternehmen hat mehr als $20 Milliarden Entwicklungskosten reingesteckt in dieses Modell, das die Luftfahrtindustrie revolutionieren sollte. So waren die Hoffnungen. Wie viele Bestellungen sind denn jetzt noch offen? Denn Fluggesellschaften warteten ja auf diesen Hoffnungsträger.
Also weit über 800 und es können auch sozusagen täglich neue dazukommen.
Die hatte man ja schon eingeplant, auch bei der Planung der Flugrouten, der Angebote an die Passagiere, wie viel Passagieraufkommen man bewältigen kann. Was heißt das für die Fluggesellschaften, die jetzt die längst erwarteten Maschinen nicht bekommen?
Es ist für die unangenehm, weil es bedeutet zum einen Mehrkosten, weil die alten Maschinen einfach mehr verbrauchen an Sprit und so weiter. Und
ja gut, aber die sind ja auch schon abgeschrieben.
Ja gut, aber trotzdem ist der Spritverbrauch halt einfach höher. Das heißt, der Dreamliner verbraucht etwa 20% weniger, hat niedrigere Wartungskosten oder sollte er zumindest haben. Auf der anderen Seite bietet er eine neue Technik. Das heißt, da sind viele Leute auch bereit, mehr dafür zu bezahlen, wenn sie eben in diesem Flugzeug sitzen. Unter anderem, weil die Luftqualität ist besser, schlicht der Luftdruck ist angenehmer, höher, die Luft ist feuchter. Das heißt, an diesen beiden Enden, da entgeht halt den Fluglinien was und dadurch, dass Fluglinien fast kein Geld verdienen, unterm Strich ist es sicherlich für die sehr unangenehm.
Aber bevor Behörden eine solche Reißleine ziehen, die natürlich auch der amerikanischen Wirtschaft, auch dem Ruf, Sie sagten es, deutlich schaden kann, da muss ja einiges passieren. Und die Pannenserie, die wir auch im Beitrag gesehen haben, das ist ja schon haarsträubend, weil da ja auch mit dem Leben von vielen Passagieren gespielt wird, wenn man das mal zu Ende denkt.
Richtig, aber Sie müssen sich auch vorstellen, dass die Tests vorher relativ umfangreich sind und man auch an einem Zeitpunkt reagiert, wo man möglicherweise in früheren Jahren nicht so hart reagiert hätte. Die letzte Stilllegung im Jahr 1979, das war nach einem Absturz, wo eben viele Leute umgekommen sind im Flugzeug und am Boden. Das heißt, man reagiert jetzt auch viel früher, eben weil man weiß, dass es erst gar nicht zu so einem Risiko kommen darf.
Was heißt das denn jetzt für den ewigen Konkurrenten von Boeing, Airbus, die ja auch mit ihren Maschinen, mit dem A350, mit dem A380 auch Lieferprobleme haben, auch Entwicklungsprobleme haben? Haben die jetzt vielleicht dann doch wieder die Nase vorn nach dieser Schlappe für Boeing?
Ich glaube nicht, weil letztlich, wenn jemand den Dreamliner abbestellen würde, es gäbe keine Alternative, weil Airbus ist halt auf Jahre hinaus ausverkauft und einen anderen Anbieter gibt es nicht. Zum anderen ist Airbus, glaube ich, muss auch erst mal beweisen mit dem A350, also dem Konkurrenzmodell zu dem 787, dass sie es eben genauso gut können. Und da haben sie auch eine Verspätung. Und die Planung ist ja, dass die noch in diesem Halbjahr den Erstflug haben. Und da müssen sie halt auch erst mal hinkommen.
Und wenn wir hören, was auch Kritiker an diesem neuen Dreamliner sagen, wir hatten es eben im Beitrag auch gehört, dass im Grunde zu viel Elektronik in diesen hochgerüsteten Maschinen ist. Ist das ein Problem, dass zu viel Computertechnik, zu viel Elektronik vielleicht auch eher störend sein kann?
Grundsätzlich muss es das nicht sein, wenn es richtig erprobt ist. Das haben wir bei Autos ja auch. Die Sache ist halt nur, man baut in Flugzeuge, eben weil so ein Flugzeug eine unheimlich lange Lebensdauer hat, baut man immer die neueste Technik ein und teilweise auch Sachen, wo man eben erst erwartet, dass sie funktionieren. Und da war halt Boeing wahrscheinlich ein bisschen steil. Ich denke, dass die Richtung Elektronik schon von anderen auch eingeschlagen wird, weil man eben auf die Art und Weise auch Gewicht spart und eigentlich auch eine höhere Zuverlässigkeit hat. Und sei es auch nur, es gab ja mal das Problem mit Triebwerksdämpfen, die in die Kabine gelangt sind und wo eben die Piloten sozusagen davon beeinträchtigt waren. Das hat man eben durch die Elektronik abgestellt, weil dann eben die Kabinenklimaanlage eben jetzt von der Elektronik gemacht wird, statt wie vorher von der Luft, die vom Triebwerk kommt.
Kurz zum Schluss noch Ihre Einschätzung. Wie wird Boeing aus dieser Krise rauskommen?
Sicherlich mit mindestens einem blauen Auge und Mehrkosten, die ordentlich sind. Es wird davon abhängen, woran lag es jetzt wirklich? Ist die Batterie schuld oder sind die Sicherungssysteme, die eigentlich ein Durchbrennen hätten verhindern sollen, dran schuld? Ist es der Lieferant oder ist es Boeing selbst? Davon wird es halt im Endeffekt abhängen. Je mehr man das in andere Richtungen schieben kann, umso besser ist es natürlich für Boeing, aber es wird mit Sicherheit was hängen bleiben.
Eine lange Fehlersuche, ähnlich wie zum Beispiel an einem Flughafen hierzulande. Rüdiger Kiani-Kress, Flugexperte von der Wirtschaftswoche. Vielen Dank.
Good morning and welcome to today's International Space Station update. Joining us here in Mission Control Houston at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. Right now looking down as the Orbit 2 team is manning all these various consoles, monitoring systems on board the orbiting laboratory. Today's team being led today by Flight Director Matt Abbott, just walking back into the room as the station's currently out of voice communication as we wait for our satellites to hand over. You can see Matt taking a seat there, and right next to him at the Capcom position, serving as a communication link between all these flight controllers and our astronauts in space, is NASA astronaut Clay Anderson. This will be Clay's last shift as Capcom here in Mission Control, as he's preparing to retire from a very successful career as a NASA astronaut here in Houston. So with this last Capcom, we wish him all the best. But meanwhile, up in space, we have our crew of Expedition 34, the six-man rotation currently led by NASA astronaut Kevin Ford there in the front row on the left. And joining him are three Russian cosmonauts. Starting across the top row, we have Oleg Novitsky, Evgeny Tarelkin, and Roman Romanenko. All the way on the right there, you see another NASA astronaut, Tom Marshburn, and our sixth crew member there in the front row as well, Canadian astronaut Chris Hadfield. Busy day for our astronauts on board the station today, starting off with Commander Kevin Ford, who spent a couple hours this morning setting up the station's robotic crew member, Robonaut 2. Robonaut's the first ever humanoid robonaut to travel into space, and right now has been going through a series of checkouts over the past year or so as they prepare to assign more and more tasks to Robonaut as a kind of a human assistance robot up there in space. Here you can see a little bit earlier today as Commander Ford was unpacking Robonaut from his resting area inside of the Destiny laboratory before he was moved through a couple of tasks by controllers in Huntsville. Then aside from all this Robonaut activity, which we'll have more video of a little bit later, Commander Ford was working on the integrated cardiovascular experiment, setting up a monitoring system on his own person as they continue to track any changes in the heart muscle of these astronauts during long duration exposure to microgravity. Also doing a little bit of maintenance activity today, cleaning out the bacteria filter and replacing it inside of the Destiny laboratory. Moving on, Russian cosmonaut Oleg Novitsky was inside of the service module, continuing some work that's been going on since last week. He's doing some minor repairs to some of the interior panels inside of that module. Aside from that, he was transferring some of the urine waste from the station's tanks over to what's known as the Robotic tank inside of the 48 Progress vehicle. It's one of the unmanned cargo craft. Currently, 2 of those docked right now to the station. And one of his other major activities for the day was the Russian bar experiment, which looks to study various means for detecting any depressurization inside of the station structure. He was assisted in that today by Evgeny Tarelkin, another of our Russian cosmonauts currently on board. Tarelkin started his day off with the Russian Sprut experiment, which is an ongoing investigation of the various fluid distribution inside of these astronauts' bodies, again due to that microgravity environment. Aside from that, he'll be taking some microbial air samples throughout the Russian segment. Our third Russian cosmonaut, Romanenko, was busy transitioning the station computer network inside of the Russian service module over to a backup configuration and performing some SINAR ocean observations. Those are an ongoing search for bioproductive water areas that are then used by researchers down here on the ground for scientific searches and also fishing operations. He was also inside one of the Progress vehicles over in 49P, filling up that Robotic tank. Meanwhile, Canadian Chris Hadfield was gathering up a lot of tools and items that he'll be needing for an upcoming water on-off valve installation inside of the European Columbus module. He was also working on the potable water dispenser in the U.S. segment, cleaning that out. And then just a little earlier this morning, he got a chance to speak to some students at the school named after him in his hometown of Ontario, Canada. And then our 6th crew member, Tom Marshburn, started off his day doing a vision test as part of the health maintenance system. Also inside of the regenerative environment control and life support system, or the ECLIS system on board the station today, transitioning over some of the software over that helps to control the urine processor assembly. We'll also be cleaning out some of the fans in the Destiny Laboratories intermodule ventilation. Aside from all of these crew activities today, last night a reboost of the station was conducted. That happening at about 8:15 p.m. Central Time. It was a 3 3/4 minute firing of the thrusters on the Progress 49, which you can see there at the very aft end of the station attached to the Zvezda. This was done in order to raise the station's lower orbit by about 1 statute mile in preparation for the upcoming single-day launch and docking of the next Progress resupply ship, Progress 50. And then the final activity of mention today will be the resumption of robotic refueling mission work with the Dexter special purpose dexterous manipulator. That'll resume later this morning after a 1-day hiatus following a few hiccups in the system yesterday.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Expedition 3536 Crew News Conference. I'm joined today by NASA astronaut Chris Cassidy, and from the Russian Federal Space Agency, cosmonauts Pavel Vinogradov and Alexander Mizurkin. The trio is set to launch to the International Space Station aboard a Soyuz spacecraft on March 27th of this year. With that, I'll turn it over to the crew for their opening comments and remarks, and then we'll follow up with questions and answers from the media. Chris?
Thanks, Jay. And thanks, everybody, for being here today and for tuning in on NASA TV. It's really exciting for us as a crew to be here because it means that we're really close to flight. And we're honing in on the end of a 2.5 year training process, which is culminating with some intense training here in Houston, and we'll soon be in Star City, where we'll have our final exams and to prepare for our launch coming up on March 28th in Kazakhstan, the 27th here in Houston. It's looking to be shaping up to be a really exciting expedition. We've got a lot going on. The most exciting thing for us, well, there's several exciting things. One of them is we have the potential to see every possible visiting vehicle that can come to the space station. The possibility exists for us to see those vehicles and participate in the capture or the rendezvous and the cargo transfer, and then watch those vehicles head on off on their missions. So that's very exciting. Couple that with 7 possible spacewalks for the whole entire crew, 4 of which on the Russian side, 3 on potential EVAs on the American side as we sort out that plan later this month and into February. On a personal side, we're very excited to join our friends and colleagues Romanenko, Chris Hadfield, and Tom Marshburn on the space station. I like to joke around that I never go to space without Tom Marshburn because he and I flew together on STS-127. And on the other side, when they leave, we'll be joined by Luca Parmitano, Karen Nyberg, and Fyodor Yurchikhin, all of whom we've become great friends with as we work through this training process to get ready for flight. So we're really excited for the whole process and can't wait to start. And with that, I'll turn it over to our very experienced commander, Pavel Vinogradov.
Наш экипаж действительно выходит на финишную прямую. Мы заканчиваем подготовку. Осталось буквально несколько недель подготовки в Москве. Я хочу сказать, что у нас великолепная команда, та, которая на борту, и с той, которой мы встретимся позже в нашем полете. Полет будет очень интересный, Крис уже сказал это. Много будет кораблей, у нас очень большая программа выходов. И я надеюсь, что у нас полет будет очень хорошим.
Yes, I would like to support the opinion that we're approaching the finishing line. We only have a few weeks left of training, including the training in Moscow. And I would like to say that we have an excellent team, both the team that is expecting us on board and the crew that will be arriving when we are on board of the ISS. Our flight will be very interesting. It will be very busy. We will have a lot of vehicle flights as well as EVAs. So I expect a lot from our flight.
So what I can add to all this word which my friend and colleagues say here, I'm just really excited and looking forward to this flight. And thank you very much for your interest in our flight too. I probably think it would be my it would be a great experience for me and the biggest thing in my whole life.
Okay, we'll now open the floor for questions from the assembled media and then also along the phone bridge. Please, media, please state your name and affiliation when you're asking a question. In the room, are there any questions?
Thanks. Mark Carreau for Aviation Week, and I'll just throw this out for any of you. If your flight turns out to be the 4-orbit demonstration of the Soyuz capability to reach the station, how does that sit with you? Is that a good thing or a bad thing, or it's an adventure to kind of see what it's like?
Я думаю, что это очень хороший момент нашего полета. Действительно, мы начнем новый этап в полетах, когда пилотируемые корабли будут доставлять экипажи достаточно быстро. Я здесь не вижу никаких технических проблем. У нас достаточно хорошая команда со стороны России, со стороны Америки работает над этим вопросом. Я уверен, что у нас все получится.
I think this is a very good thing that we are decreasing the time that it takes for crews to reach the ISS. I don't anticipate any technical issues associated with this activity, and I'm confident that we, both in Russia and in the United States, we have excellent teams that are supporting us.
У нас раньше были такие полеты уже, это и в 60-х, в 70-х годах, и по программе Gemini летали, пилотируемые корабли достаточно быстро, за 2-3 витка. И в России, в Советском Союзе были такие полеты. Так что мы просто начинаем проходить этот путь снова. Я думаю, что у нас все получится. Спасибо.
This is nothing new. Back in the 1960s and then in 1970s, we had short approach or short rendezvous within the Gemini program, and also in Russia, or back then the USSR, where it took only 2 or 3 orbits to reach the full orbit. And so I am confident that we will be successful in repeating this achievement.
Okay, are there other questions in the room? Okay, we'll now go to any questions from other NASA centers. Well, actually, we're going to follow up with another question from Mr. Carell.
Yeah, thank you, Mark Carell, for Aviation Week. The program scientists mentioned that one of the new research activities will be the intracranial pressure measurements that have to do with vision problems, and maybe this is one for you, Chris, if you could. This seems like one of those kinds of experiments that takes some time to do it right for you guys, yet it's one of those things that could be very important for deep space exploration and even help in diagnosing a range of medical ills for us common people. How do you look at that?
Well, obviously it's very important data that we'll be collecting for, just like you said, for our own health, but also as it translates to those of us here on the planet for ocular health and long-term health with yourself. But that's one of those experiments in my mind. The science is the picture, and we could have everything set up perfectly, but not take the picture correctly, and it won't get the correct data back to the folks that really know what they're doing when they look at these images. So that's where our training is focused on in that particular experiment, is how to set up that equipment, how to utilize the different pieces of a gear that will get that picture with the right granularity on the right spots, and looking at all the parameters associated with the eye. I'm not an eye guy, obviously. I'm just a subject and a very willing participant in the activity. So that's where we'll be talking to folks on the ground who'll be watching on board with us via video, and any questions we have, we can call down to the specialists and say, how's that look? Would you like us to take another one? And we'll iterate that process until we do deliver them the right data. But clearly, that has immediate impact to crew health, both on ISS, and obvious impact to future missions, whatever they may be, as we live a long term in zero gravity.
Okay. Are there other questions from the room? Okay. We'll now go to our phone bridge. Spaceflight Now.
My question's been asked and answered. Thanks.
Okay. We'll come back. Are there any other follow-up questions? Mr. Carell.
Thank you very much, Mark Carell from the Houston Chronicle. It sounds like potentially there's a lot of spacewalk activity. There's higher expectations now for scientific research, and you mentioned the potential for a lot of spacecraft dockings, and they're all different kinds of spacecraft. I guess I'm trying to get kind of a sense of what you anticipate as the work pace. It sounds like it could be rather frantic, or if you're just well organized, you'll step right into it. But any of you that would talk about that, I'd appreciate.
May I go? Yeah. That's a great question, Mark, because you're exactly right. It's shaping up to be a very dynamic and a very busy expedition. We welcome that. That makes us feel very rewarded and satisfying high job satisfaction. Not that anything in space isn't, but when you can deliver for people that have worked hard to produce all those activities on the ground, that's very satisfying. How do you manage that? That's one of the key jobs of the planning team on the ground. And then with our feedback on, hey, we're redline pace here. We might need to back off. And we have, as you may have heard, we have conferences with the ops planning team and the flight directors once a week. And through that communication, we'll get the feedback into the system of, we can handle a little more, or this is about as much as we can take, and we'll just keep the pace here for a little bit. Some of the timeline pressure, if you will, may be alleviated as the plan on paper unfolds into a real situation, and then we'll see how it plays from there. But there'll be certain, I'm sure there'll be certain discrete periods of time throughout the mission when we, along with the flight control team, have to together figure out what the prioritization of all these activities is so we can fit it all into a given workday.
Okay, are there any other follow-up questions? Along the phone bridge, are there any other follow-up questions? All right, well, this concludes this afternoon's press briefing. For more questions about NASA, NASA programs, the International Space Station, and this crew, please join us at www.nasa.gov/station.
So for Expedition 3536, I'm just going to give you some brief highlights of a few select investigations. Overall, we have, just in Kibo, Columbus, and Destiny, we'll have over 137 investigations active during Expedition 35 and 36. 80 of those are led by U.S.-funded or U.S.-supported investigators. About 25% of our investigations are sponsored under the declaration of ISS as a national laboratory. This started back in 2005 when we were declared a national laboratory by Congress, and that represents our users that are from other government agencies, commercial companies, the private sector, and nonprofit organizations, so they're not funded by NASA. We're also serving the needs of over 400 investigators from around the world, and those investigators represent 28 different countries. And you saw in the graphic that was up, those colors represented the different disciplines. And so we have biology and biotechnology, earth and space sciences, education and cultural activities, human research focused on human physiology and future exploration, physical sciences, and technology development and demonstration. So with that number of investigations, obviously I can't give you a very detailed rundown of most of them. What I did was select 5 investigations covering that breadth of disciplines linked to some of our past research results and that are kind of new in this starting up in Expedition 35. So the first I want to talk about is from the biology area, and it's called Microbiome. Some recent discoveries over the last few years in the microbial sciences have showed us that bacteria account for basically 10 times more cells in our body than our own cells. So we're outnumbered 10 to 1 everywhere we go by the bacteria that we carry with us. And we know that in space flight, bacteria grow quite differently. We also know that the human immune system is affected significantly. And so what we'll be doing in this project is collecting samples from ISS crew members before, during, and after their missions to the ISS, and also looking at the environment of the ISS and the diet and other aspects, other ways that humans have bacteria come into their systems. And we'll be looking at their stress levels and their immune system function as well. It's important from an exploration perspective because this research will help us predict how long-term space travel, which is basically humans and the microbes that go with us, is going to affect those communities, those ecological communities. But also, it's really important because it's addressing a top recommendation of the National Academies of Sciences last year when they suggested that ISS needed to be developed as a microbial observatory to address some of these new findings that have been made across the scientific community. And so this is one of the first studies that really starts addressing that recommendation. And that's important because of the benefits back here on Earth. If we can understand how microbial communities work and take advantage of the ISS as a relatively isolated environment, there's a lot of basic science and then improvements in health on Earth that we can make. Moving to human physiology, we have a new investigation starting in Expedition 35 called Ocular Health. And this is an important investigation because it builds off a discovery made through our space medicine about 2 years ago. It will be the first experiment to characterize the risk of what we're now calling microgravity-induced visual impairment and intracranial pressure. Essentially what we've discovered is that some astronauts on orbit, not all of them, but they have real changes in fluid shifts in their bodies, and that leads them to both have changes in their vision and also changes in the pressure in their central nervous system. About 20% of the astronauts that have flown to the International Space Station have reported these kinds of vision changes. So what we're going to be doing is taking detailed scientific measurements. Here you see Sunny having some tomography measurements taken of her eye. You may have had something like this in a doctor's office where you have some anesthetizing eye drops. and then they use that direct contact to tap and actually measure the pressure of the fluid that's inside the eye. You also saw some video of ultrasounds, and here's another instrument being used to characterize the eye. So we'll be taking systematic measurements to really try and understand this process for the first time. This is an example of why we really need long-duration human spaceflight with multiple crew members to understand all the different effects on the human body. But it's also interesting that this is a process that was not predicted from what we know about human health on Earth. And we even have some results now that have come out that suggest that what we're seeing in astronauts in orbit could link to ways of understanding cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, and other aspects in people on Earth that might not be quite as healthy as our astronauts are in orbit. So we're really excited to have this important study kicking off. It will take place over about 2 years. Next, I want to shift from human physiology focused on exploration to technology demonstration focused on exploration. And really just yesterday on ISS, we started a study called UBNT, or Ultrasonic Background Noise Test. This test is to observe the high-frequency noise levels that are background on the International Space Station and develop an understanding of what those noise levels are so that we can then develop a tool to automatically detect leaks. You can think of a leak as having some kind of a hissing noise, and these ultrasonic detectors, and you see a training video here of someone putting the epoxy on one of these detectors and actually attaching it onto the space behind a rack. And basically what the acoustic engineers will be doing is developing a profile of what normal noises are like inside the ISS, and then they'll be able to start developing algorithms to detect abnormal noises, including the kind of noises you might get if there's air leaking through the pressure wall. And so this will be an important advance in the way that we approach spacecraft safety and leak detection for future exploration missions. Next, I'll shift from technology demonstration to a more fundamental physical process, and that is combustion. Last year, we had a really neat discovery in our combustion rack, and based on one of the combustion experiments we were doing, where we were burning very simple fuels, in this case heptane drops, and this was from an experiment called FLEX. It was the first time that scientists had observed a low-temperature, soot-free, cool flame. Now, cool flame sounds kind of strange. A normal flame is about 1,400 degrees Celsius, and a cool flame is about 600 degrees Celsius. We have a video to show you from the inside of the combustion rack that shows you what this observation is. So you see the droplet's ignited, and you see the burning go on. Then you'll see an extinction where it gets dark, it goes out, but the flame, the burning actually continues. And then in the end, you can see that through a chemiluminescent afterglow that comes back afterwards. And so that's how scientists know that the flame continued to burn. So this has really important applications on Earth, because this is something you just can't study any other way. This kind of droplet staying in one place and being controllable and measurable without having convection drawing a flame upward in the point that we normally see, say, when we're burning a candle on Earth. This is a fundamental property of combustion you can only study in space. And this gives us some insights and some ways to improve internal combustion engines, because this kind of cool flame property, if you can control it better on Earth, would help you to control combustion in a way that could make engines more fuel efficient. The experiment that we'll be starting in Expedition 35 is a follow-on to the FLEX investigation data I just showed you. It's called the Italian Combustion Experiment for Green Air, or ICEGA for short. And here you can see a picture in front of the combustion rack as a gas bottle's being put in. And it's a collaboration with the Italian Space Agency. Instead of burning things like heptane, decane, or octane, we'll be looking at second and third generation biofuels. Second generation biofuels are, instead of being made from corn or soybeans, they're made from any kind of excess biomass, so they're not competing with food production. And third generation biofuels are the ones that are made from algae. So we'll be testing combustion in the combustion rack using these different biofuels. And this is obviously very applied at getting insights that will help us to improve the efficiency of combustion with biofuels. Finally, I'd like to shift to the earth sciences and talk about an important earth science remote sensing instrument on ISS, the HICO, or Hyperspectral Imager for the Coastal Ocean. You can see a picture of that here mounted externally on the Kibo laboratory. Hyperspectral data is essentially hundreds of spectral bands instead of just a few like Landsat has. And so this gives you a lot more information about what's being observed and measured on the Earth below the instrument. As of January 1st, this instrument has transitioned from being just a naval research-operated payload for the Naval Research Laboratory to being a facility on the International Space Station. And this opens it up to a wide array of users, both national lab users from other government agencies and the private sector, especially users that are focused on agribusiness and oil exploration. And it also opens the instrument up to more access to our NASA users that are funded by the Science Mission Directorate in studies of the Earth system. So we're excited about that transition. And I wanted to close by showing you one example of what the Environmental Protection Agency has done with hyperspectral data. They had a Pathfinder Innovation Project exploratory grant from their Office of Research and Development at EPA. And this is one of the results of those. This is Pensacola Bay, Florida. And if you see the little red parts of that image, they took data from HYCO and they processed it. And those little red areas represent where there's significant nitrogen coming into the bay and causing blooms of algae. And so they use this by combining their in-water measurements with the remote sensing measurements. They've used it to develop a predictive system that they can use for monitoring the water quality in Pensacola Bay. They're now working to expand this to more bays around the Gulf Coast region and even to look at other EPA regions and see if they can extend this. And both the research oceanographers at EPA as well as their Office of Research is continuing to support expanded use. So this is the kind of use of HYCO as a national laboratory facility that really benefits our life here on Earth and will also be extended to additional users because of HYCO becoming an ISS facility. So that summary really just touches the surface. I urge you to look at the press kit and on nasa.gov to see all of those hundreds of investigations going on. And we look forward to a really dynamic and active research expedition.